Hello, this is Matthias Goertz with my monthly COVID-19 update. I shall share my screen. Hopefully. There it is. So, welcome to the 1st of August of year one, after Homo sapiens. The title of today's presentation is Vaccine Mania. Start with a little quote. Please read yourself. Okay, in case you thought fake news was a new thing, it is not. It was there alive and kicking more than 200 years ago. Okay, let me start by once again reflecting on how the world is talking about COVID-19 and how I think we ought to be talking about COVID-19. To that purpose, I've just simply copied and pasted the first sort of couple of paragraphs on COVID-19 from Wikipedia, wikipedia.com. The underlined words there, you don't need to worry about. They're underlined in Wikipedia. It just means that when you're in Wikipedia, you can click on them and it will lead you to that entry of that word. The red, highlighted in red, that's my highlights, okay? So how is Wikipedia, and I'm taking Wikipedia as being somewhat representative, that may not be entirely fair, right? But yeah, it is what it is. So I take this as somewhat representative of how the world is, how the majorities, the ones that Goethe just lambasted for all the false news that they're spreading. So how the majority of the world is talking about COVID-19. I take Wikipedia.com as sort of being somewhat representative of that. So COVID-19 is a contagious disease caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, also known as SARS-CoV-2, was first identified in Wuhan, and it spread worldwide, and which led to an ongoing pandemic. The symptoms are variable. They include fever, cough, headache, fatigue, breathing difficulties, loss of smell and taste. Symptoms may begin 1 to 14 days after exposure. At least a third of people do not develop any noticeable symptoms. Of those people who develop symptoms noticeable enough to be classed as patients, most develop mild or moderate symptoms. So here is something about the definition of patients that, unfortunately, as you can see here, the word patient is not underlined in Wikipedia. It means there is no click-through to a definition. But apparently most of those they say could be classified as patients actually have mild to moderate symptoms. So they may not be patients by my definition, which is a patient is someone who requires hospitalization. Recognizing that that may be extreme because, of course, there will be some people who have mild symptoms and they don't feel well, and maybe they miss a day at school, you know, as you would with like a light flu or with a cold, right? But I don't call them patients because you need to have a clear definition that is you can operationalize in terms of finding data. And that's why I use hospitalizations, because those are actually tracked by some countries. There's not a lot of information about them, but some countries, for example, the US, the CDC, are providing fairly, or used to be providing regular updates on hospitalizations, which is where I get my data, right, from these hospitalization figures. So just to be clear, what Wikipedia calls patients here may be a wider group than the ones that I call patients. But they're saying, okay, of that wider group, 81% have mild symptoms, and then 14% develop severe symptoms, 5% critical symptoms. But unfortunately, since they don't tell us what proportion of people fit into the patient group, that in their definition, those numbers don't help us very much. They're proportionally interesting, but they're not absolutely interesting, right? Because if you don't know what proportion of people are defined as patients, then 81%, 14, and 15, and 5, sorry, that relatively you can say, oh, of those defined as patients, that's the segmentation. But whether the patients in their definition make up 70% or 30% or 10%, they don't say. Yeah, so this is not so useful the way they phrase it. You could not operationalize this, for example, to build a model of fatalities, right? Which is what I've been doing. Right? But anyway, so that's how they talk about it. Older people at higher risk, and there are some people who have long lasting effects after having been severely ill with COVID. They call it long COVID. And then they say COVID-19 transmits when people breathe in air, airborne particles. Yeah, I think we all know that. Yeah, people remain contagious for up to 20 days. Yeah, I think that's sort of the gist of the things that are sort of known about the transmission. So let me comment on these things one by one. The red areas, particularly. Hold on, I should be here. So the first thing they say, COVID-19 is a contagious disease. Now that's already sort of a bit of an iffy statement, right? What is certainly highly contagious is SARS-CoV-2, the virus, right? Contagious means it transmits easily from one host to another. But for example, pneumonia, which is basically the generic term for COVID-19. COVID-19 is basically a pneumonia caused by this particular virus. There are many, pneumonia can be caused by all kinds of pathogens, and this is just one of many, right? For some reason, people have chosen to give this pneumonia, its own special name, namely COVID-19, which I don't know whether that is necessary, but certainly the taxonomists like to be very precise. And so COVID-19 is a pneumonia triggered by SARS-CoV-2, or that is incurred in conjunction with SARS-CoV-2, right? But a pneumonia is not very contagious. Once a virus or any pathogen is down in your lung, it does not transmit so easily. So a pneumonia is not easily transmitted over to another person. And the other point I would, so COVID-19 being contagious, that's debatable. I mean, it is somewhat contagious. I mean, if you're working in a hospital, I'm sure you want to protect yourself, because if you're dealing with pneumonia patients, I think you do want to wear a mask and maybe PPE or what, right? I'm not familiar with the details, but sure enough, if you have regular interaction with a pneumonia patient, you probably do want to protect yourself, because there is some risk of contagion, but it's not a very high risk. Anyways, these people are in hospital, right? Almost by my definition, they are hospitalized people. Otherwise, they wouldn't count as COVID patients, right? So the COVID-19 patient is someone who has been hospitalized with pneumonia, right? And so at least they're in a hospital, meaning insofar as access is limited, and insofar as the staff is professional and trained to deal with that situation and wear the right equipment, you cannot, in my view, say that pneumonia like COVID-19 is highly contagious. It is somewhat contagious, but it would not easily spread. What spreads is the coronavirus that can trigger this particular pneumonia. Okay, and I think that again, those distinctions to me are extremely important. That's at the root of understanding what we could have done and what could have been instead of what actually happened. The other thing I would say there is that the root cause, as I've been saying many times, the root cause of someone becoming diseased with COVID-19 is the immune system of that person not reacting properly to being infected when the SARS-CoV-2 infection comes into the upper respiratory system. So the root cause of someone becoming ill with pneumonia is a weakened or misfiring, misreacting immune system. Now that root cause, and you might say, isn't the root cause the virus? Yeah, that's the trigger. You know, if you studied history, as I did at some point, you know, you distinguish between what is the root cause of a historical event and what is the sort of the trigger. So I remember World War I, classical example. The trigger was the killing of the Austrian prince, who would have been next in line, I think, for the position of emperor, and he was killed in Sarajevo in 1914, and that killing triggered a chain of events that led to mutual declarations of war, etc. So some historians would say that's the trigger of the war. But the cause, the root causes of the war are much deeper. There are rivalries between European powers and so on. Not that we want to go into that, but there's a difference between something that is the trigger and something that is a root cause. And I'm arguing that the root cause of COVID-19 is deficient immune systems. When I say IS here, I mean immune systems, okay, and not any other organization, for example, that goes by the same name. Immune systems, yeah, just to keep it short. So the root causes are deficient immune systems, and statistics, hospitalizations show 1% of global population have a problem and are not able to fend off the virus or prevent the virus from getting into the lower respiratory system, where it can turn into or where it can trigger a COVID-19, a pneumonia, right? But this deficient, the point here is the deficient immune system is not transferable. If I have a deficient immune system, I cannot transfer that to you, right? That is not contagious, that condition, okay? So I think what I'm saying is, yeah, the trigger, the SARS-CoV-2 is highly contagious, but the root cause is not at all contagious. And the actual disease, COVID-19, is contagious in a very limited way. Yeah. And I think that these things are important to debate. But as you probably have noticed, there's no such debate anywhere. As far as I can see, nobody is debating that, right? Everybody's, oh, it's a contagious disease, you know, as if that is A, written in stone, and B, as if it's clear what exactly that means, right? Okay. Next point, just about the name of SARS-CoV-2. I've said this almost a year ago now. It's a uniquely inappropriate and misleading name for what is, in all likelihood, a common cold coronavirus, right? And this idea that, oh, it's a severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus, it already suggests that, oh, if I get this virus, I'm in trouble, right? That's what this acronym seems to suggest. Severe, acute, respiratory, right? Again, 99% of all people who are infected with this virus have no problem with this virus, because the immune system works and it doesn't allow the virus to get into the lower respiratory system, where it creates a severe acute respiratory syndrome. In other words, a pneumonia. Right. So it's very misleading if a virus in 1% of the cases leads to this, and in 99% of the cases it doesn't. And by the way, if humanity wasn't so aging, and if we didn't have such unhealthy lifestyles, that number would be 99.99% probably of people not having a problem with this virus, right? The reason the whole 1%, if you can either say that's a lot or that's little, but you know, the whole 1% have a problem with this is because of our lifestyle choices. It's nothing to do with this virus, right? So actually, in the normal standard situation, for a normally healthy person with a normal immune system, this virus is virtually risk-free. Yeah. So to call it a severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus, number two, which links it to the number one, and people remember, especially in Asia, they remember, oh, that one was very dangerous because the fatality, the IFR seemed to be very high. Now, whether that's really true, I'm not sure because the numbers are not solid on that, and I didn't track it back then, right? Because it went away fairly quickly. So I don't take a strong view there. But whether it was really so fatal as people make it up to be, I don't know. But the memory of people, certainly here in Asia, of SARS is very fatal. And to call this one SARS-2, it was just a really, really bad idea. Even as from a point of view of the experts, the taxonomists, maybe it makes sense because they say, well, but structurally this virus is closely related to that other virus. That may well be the case, right? And I'm not really arguing, as you know, with how the taxonomists do their taxonomy, right? That's up to them. The problem is these names then come into the public domain, and they drive people crazy, apparently. For 99% of us, this is not a severe acute respiratory syndrome virus. It's a cold virus. So yeah, in fact, for 100% of us, it's a cold virus, but in 1% of the cases, we have a problem with it. But that's our problem. It's not the virus's problem. Right? So it's a uniquely inappropriately named virus. And that's just semantics, you may say. Yes, it's just semantics, but semantics do matter, right? In terms of how people think about a concept or a thing. It does matter how you name it, right? So that is not innocent in how you name something. So it's completely misnamed. Now, in terms of ongoing pandemic, you know, my argument had been that according to some standard definition that you find of the standard English dictionaries, this isn't actually a pandemic because the most common definition I saw was that it means a high proportion of people become sick. And as I just said, only 1% of people infected become sick. So that's not a high proportion, right? I think nobody will argue that 1% is a high proportion. That's a low proportion, right? So I've been arguing it's not a pandemic by that definition. But I checked just to be consistent because I'm talking about Wikipedia, and I decided to pick Wikipedia as representative, right? So to be consistent, I checked their definition of pandemic, which they have. And they are a bit broader. They say, you know, multiple countries across continents and a large number or a significant number of people fall ill. Now, if we say 1% of the world population fall ill, I mean, not accounting for vaccinations, reducing that number now, but without vaccination would be 1%, according to my model. So that would be 80 million people falling ill with COVID, right? And there you can say, well, that's a big number, right? It's a small proportion of the nearly 8 billion humans we have, maybe 1%, but it is a large number in absolute terms. At least you can argue that, right? At least you cannot argue against that and say, no, that's a matter of taste almost, whether you think that's a large number or a small number. But I can say that with the Wikipedia definition of pandemics, it is possible to call this a pandemic, and it is not false or anything, right? So I just wanted to clarify that. So I'm okay in the context of how Wikipedia defines this to say, yeah, you can call this a pandemic because you have a significant number of diseased people in various parts of the world, right? And that is this COVID, yeah, who actually have a pneumonia, yeah, millions of them. Yeah, so you know, I'm okay with that then, and say, okay, let's call it an ongoing pandemic by the definition of Wikipedia. So just to clarify, I come back to that point in a moment. There's another interesting twist to that as well. I'll come to that. Now, I just read to you some of those symptoms, right? Cough, headache, slight fever, whatever it was. I just wanted to highlight to you that these are cold symptoms, not COVID-19 symptoms. And that's where again, the distinction matters, but in Wikipedia and elsewhere, it breaks down. They say symptoms of COVID-19 include the cough. No, the cough is associated, I mean, pneumonia may also have coughs. I'm not quite sure, you know, but the typical symptoms they describe here are cold symptoms, meaning you have those, if you're symptomatic, you have those symptoms while the virus is active in your upper respiratory system, right? Not your lower respiratory system. If it gets into your lower respiratory system, then you get those symptoms down there, right? hypoxia, respiratory failure, shock, and so on. That can happen once you have COVID, right? But the earlier symptoms here, those are cold symptoms. That's just associated with you having been infected with cold viruses, including this one. It probably doesn't come by itself. It probably comes, as I said before, in a cocktail with other cold viruses. So it's not even clear whether it was this virus that triggered your cold, right? It is a cocktail of viruses that triggers your cold. And yes, if this virus is part of the cocktail and you do a PCR test for this particular virus, it will be positive and say, yeah, among your cocktail of cold viruses that you've just sort of acquired, which we do 2 to 4 times a year, right? Among those, it so happens, is also this one, among others, right? That's what the test tells you, right? Unfortunately, the test doesn't tell you whether you have a weak immune system. And in fact, there's no test for that. And you can be unlucky and you can feel totally healthy and still maybe your immune system misfires for some reason, or you're just bad luck. Sometimes the virus maybe just gets through, right? Even all the 200 other common cold viruses can trigger a pneumonia. It's just very rare. Yeah, because we know them so well, we don't let them, right? But it can there's always accidents in nature, right? As I talked about this before. Without accidents in nature, there would be no evolution and we would not be here, right? There have to be accidents and exceptions from the rule, right? Okay, so with the classification of patients, I already talked about it. I say 1%. 1% need hospitalization. And that's because they basically acquire pneumonia. There may be some other, early on, there were some reports of the virus spreading into other organs. I'm not saying that that isn't the case, right? I mean, viruses travel, right? But this one clearly, usually, because it comes through the upper respiratory system, the logical place for it to get is the lung, and not really any further, because there's no easy transportation system for the virus to get beyond the lung. I mean, it might get into the bloodstream and then go somewhere else, right? But I don't think that's such a big, I think that's the exception rather than the rule, right? Where it does get, if your immune system lets it through, is it gets into your lung and your lower respiratory system, right? And that's where it's problematic. But again, by my definition, 1% of all infected people worldwide are patients, meaning they are hospitalized and they have pneumonia. So they have COVID-19. 99% of people infected with this virus don't develop COVID-19. Now, just to be clear, this number differs widely between countries, or between, it's not really about countries, but it's demographies in different places, right? As you know, old age, obesity, diabetes, etc. Those so-called risk factors determine the IFR, the infection fatality ratio, and that's higher in countries, obviously, where you have a more aged population, where you have more people who are obese and more people who have diabetes, right? So it's it's a lifestyle illness, if you like, right? It's a lifestyle illness where people get. In the richer countries, typically, there will be more of this, right? There will be more COVID, proportionally more COVID cases, because the demographics are disfavorable. Right? But on average, globally, it's 1%. Yeah, so they say older people are at risk. Now that's interesting that they say that. That's definitely true, but they're not talking about immune systems at all here. There's no mentioning in this article of maybe further down in the detail. I don't know. I didn't check, but in the sort of high-level introductory paragraph that you usually have in Wikipedia before it goes into the nitty-gritties, there's no mentioning of the information of the immune system. But actually, it's people who have a compromised immune system who are at risk. And that compromised immune system is, of course, closely correlated with age and those other factors I talked about, right? But they don't, so what they're saying is not wrong. Older people are at more risk. Yeah, that's correct. But they're not they're not pushing beyond that and say, well, why are older people? Yeah, what is it that makes older people be more at risk? And the answer is very simple: it's the immune system. Which is, and why is the immune system problematic for them? Just probably because it's slower. It's still working. They still have a working immune system, but it just takes a little longer. And because this virus is new, the first time you encounter it, it's new to us. That is what distinguishes it from all the other common cold viruses that we already know very well. Right? This one is new to us. So our immune system needs to react really quick in starting to create the right neutralizing antibodies in order to prevent it from getting down here, right? And those people at risk are those whose immune system is already a little bit slower or less capable, if that's the word, right? It takes a little longer to produce those antibodies, right? Or it doesn't quite get the antibodies right because it doesn't quite have the right degree of precision in its engineering, right? So that as a result of that not fully capable and functioning and speedy immune system, there is a time gap. So the virus gets into your upper respiratory system and starts multiplying there and starts transmitting to other hosts, right? It doesn't immediately go into your lung because it doesn't actually need or want to go into your lung. That's from the point of view of the virus, to get into the lung is an accident. It's a cul-de-sac. It's very difficult for the virus to transfer from there. So for the virus, there's no gain. They just die down here. It's a death trap, right, for the virus. The virus has no interest to get into our lung, right? It's an accident that happens because our immune system doesn't shut the door fast enough. And so by accident, some of these viruses that are up here and multiplying happily, they wander off, right? And guess what? Since this is all connected, they just wander off down here, right? They go on a little stroll and then they end up in our aioli and realize that it's a very comfortable place to sit and multiply. So they do. But they can't easily transmit from there. As I said, it's not very contagious once they're down there. So for the virus, that's really a cul-de-sac, right? So it's an accident, yeah. COVID-19, like probably any pneumonia, is an accident. And the accident happens because the immune system doesn't do its job. Normally, it would just close the door here fast enough. Virus doesn't get down there. After a week or two, the virus has done its job transmitting to a few other people, and then it just dies off, right? And our immune system, of course, attacks it, and then it clears out the mess, right? That's called an inflammation. So the immune system just does its job, but the number one job of the immune system in this type of virus is to prevent it from getting down into the lower respiratory system, right? And so in some people that doesn't happen, and those tend to be people who are elderly, obese, diabetics, and heart and lung, prior history of heart and lung disease. So where for a variety of reasons, the immune system isn't good enough to prevent the virus from getting down there. You see nothing of that in here in Wikipedia. It just says all people at high risk. Yeah, that's true, but it's very dissatisfactory or unsatisfactory information because it tells you very little, right? You would expect that they would exploit that. That's an empirical fact. We all agree on that empirical fact, but why? Why do old people have that problem, right? And other people as well, not only old people, right? It's down to the immune system. That's sort of the point. And that not only Wikipedia doesn't talk about that, nobody talks about that. That's why I take Wikipedia to be quite representative. Nobody talks about our immune system. All right. So COVID-19 transmits. See, that's another one of these imprecisions or ambivalences that they just allow to sneak in and nobody cares or notices. As I said earlier, COVID-19 scarcely transmits. From down here in the lower respiratory system, there's very little transmission. SARS-CoV-2, when it colonizes the upper respiratory system, it transmits. The COVID being a pneumonia is not a very contagious disease. A common cold is very contagious, right? Which is happening up here. And you can imagine how easy it is. You cough, you sneeze, you you know, whatever, right? You talk, you sing, right? That's how all common cold viruses happily survive on human hosts, and I'm sure on other animal hosts as well, because they trigger in us these kind of, you know, explosions of liquids on which they then travel, right? Liquids or even air, right? Or aerosols or whatever, right? Different viruses have different strategies, but it's all in the end comes down to the same thing. These viruses are able to transmit from one host to another because they can trigger us to, you know, to cough and to sneeze and so on. And also because they are not so serious, we don't really feel very ill, and we continue our normal lifestyle. We don't withdraw normally. We continue going to work and to school and so on, and it, you know, thereby happily transmit to our, you know, colleagues and friends and schoolmates, right? And that's exactly what works well for these cold viruses. So over probably millions of years, they have found this equilibrium with humans, our predecessors, and also maybe other animals. Right? It's an equilibrium where they don't do any harm typically, with very few exceptions. They don't do any harm in us, and we therefore don't really fight them because it's not worth it. Our immune system doesn't really fight them very much because it's not worth it. It just lets them do, okay? And the price we pay is that maybe for a few days we have a headache or we don't feel so well, but we, you know, we're sort of, evolution has determined that that's okay for us, that we can pay that price. Yeah, and for the virus, it works beautifully, right? So this new common cold virus, it will work beautifully as well eventually. It just, the adaptation period takes some time. Virus needs to get used to us. It doesn't want to get into the lungs. It may, the new variants are always, by definition, going to be faster in terms of transmission, right? If they weren't, they would not survive. They would not stand out from the previous ones, and they would just go under, right? So by definition, if a Delta virus becomes dominant, it just means, yes, because it transmits faster. And if it didn't transmit faster, we wouldn't know of it. It would never have come to the fore, right? So by definition, every new variant will be somewhat quicker, or at least equal in speed of transmission, or it may have a slightly different technique, or, you know, it may, for example, live a little bit longer when the aerosol becomes dry. And, you know, normally they dry out, but maybe if a new variant can live on that aerosol a little bit longer, that's a competitive advantage, right? So these variants will have some competitive advantage over the others. Otherwise, we won't notice them. They will not come to the fore, right? However, in terms of their propensity to penetrate down to our lung, that should actually go down over time, because, as I said, the virus has no interest in getting in our lungs. So a variant that is equally transmissible and less likely to get into the lung may actually outcompete the other, although may or may not, because although it is not an advantage to the virus if they get into the lung, it may also not be like a significant disadvantage, right? But, you know, conceptually, there's no reason to assume that new variants will be more likely, have a higher propensity to get into our lung. No. But they will have a higher propensity to transmit from one upper respiratory to the other. Yes. Right. So COVID-19 doesn't really transmit. See? So this is, I mean, if you're strict about the language, this is wrong. Or at least it needs a lot of explanation. It may sometimes be the case that a virus can transmit from down here over to another person, but, you know, that's not really related to COVID. That's not related to the disease that it can trigger, right? The virus transmits primarily from the upper respiratory system to another upper respiratory system, and as long as it stays in the upper respiratory system, it's harmless, right? And only if it gets down here, it can trigger problems for us. And the only reason it gets down here, other than some kind of luck, or bad luck for us, right? Or some kind of, as I said, in nature, there will always be some exceptions, right? And freak events, they will always happen. They must happen, right? But other than freak events, the virus wouldn't get into our lungs. Right? It only gets there because our immune system doesn't shut the door. So that the onus is on us, not on the virus, to fix this. And we are fixing it with the help of vaccines. But people don't talk about the vaccines in that way. They don't realize that that's what the vaccines actually do. Right? Yeah. Okay. So how should we be thinking about COVID-19? So again, I'm back to wikipedia.com. So here is their take on the common cold, which is what I am arguing, have been arguing for a long time, we should be thinking about when we talk about SARS-CoV-2. It's a common cold coronavirus. So viral infectious disease, upper respiratory system, primarily affects those parts. The symptoms, here they are again, right? Occasionally, here's key point. Wikipedia says this, occasionally, those with other health problems may develop pneumonia. See, there it is. That is the decisive sentence, I think, that links COVID-19 and common cold. Occasionally, and this is true for any cold virus, not just this one, any cold virus, occasionally, if a host has some other health problems, they may, basically they develop pneumonia because the virus gets down into the lung, right? So in other words, what they mean here, and they don't say it, right, which is amazing, but what they mean is, when they say other health problems, what they mean is compromised immune system. Occasionally, those who may have a compromised immune system because of age and the other risk factors we talked about many times, same risk factors, right, may develop pneumonia. And developing pneumonia means the virus managed to get down into your lower respiratory system and then create an infection there in the lungs, in the alveoli. Alveoli, sorry. That's basically what they're saying here. So they're basically saying exactly what I've been saying in slightly different words. They're just not realizing that they've just given here a definition or a one-sentence succinct summary of what's happening with SARS-CoV-2. Occasionally, with people who have an immune system problem, it gets into the lung and they develop pneumonia. That's precisely what we're witnessing here. Right? But apparently nobody at Wikipedia makes any linkage from here to say, oh, isn't that exactly what we're observing with COVID-19? Yes, it is. That's exactly what we're observing with COVID-19. The only thing that is special about SARS-CoV-2 is that it is new. The other common cold viruses we've had a lot of time getting used to. This one is new. Therefore, and again, you have to be very specific, then it becomes very clear. Therefore, our immune system doesn't have a prior blueprint of the right antibodies tailored to this new virus because it's not encountered. As soon as the immune system encounters a new pathogen of any sort, it scans it, it puts it on the radar screen and gets to know it, and then it develops very quickly the appropriate effective antibodies. Right? There are other parts of the immune system, not just antibodies, but let's not get overly complicated. The key here is the antibodies that prevent the virus from getting from up here to down there. That's the key, and those are antibodies. So these antibodies need to be produced quick enough so the virus has no chance to penetrate further down. That happens in almost every single case with almost any of those common cold viruses, except, as we now know, when it's new. When the virus is new, we don't have that blueprint ready, and it takes our immune system a little bit longer to react because it first needs to figure out this new thing. Logical, right? It learns very quickly, but it takes a bit more time. And that time window is critical. If that time window gets too long, the virus will just statistically have a higher likelihood to get down here. Now, most people, the immune system is so fit, it does this so fast that even with this new virus, even though it didn't know it, it gets its act together so quickly that the virus doesn't have a chance to get down here. But unfortunately, in those elderly, et cetera, it takes a bit longer, and then there is a certain statistical probability that the virus slips through. Yeah. So what we're seeing here for the common cold viruses, and they're saying there are well over 200 of them, right? So we just now have just one more of them. That's all that's happened in the last 18 months, okay? That we've just added one to the over 200 that we already had, right? And there's always been a certain probability that if you catch a cold, it could become a pneumonia. It's just very rare because our immune systems are so well attuned with these common cold viruses because they encounter them many times in your life, right? So they, of course, when you're a baby, it's the first time for everybody, right? But apparently babies are very good with cold viruses, and including SARS-CoV-2, right? We have no problems. Babies have no problems with it because they're apparently very quick in doing the right thing, right? Even though they have, so for baby, of course, any of the cold viruses, unless they got it through their mother's blood, which is, I don't know, but it's possible, perhaps, it would be there's always a first time of exposure, right? But, babies don't have a problem with that, apparently. And once you've encountered it once, you have a memory of it, and then you have no problem with it ever, probably, even when you get old. As long as you have still that memory and that blueprint, even in very elderly people still usually does okay with common cold viruses. Right? The immune system is so well prepared for these known viruses that even a very elderly person doesn't easily get a pneumonia from it. But you all know that pneumonia is much more common in elderly people, and this is why, right? Because the immune system is weaker, and therefore there's a bigger probability, and it's all game of probabilities. There's a bigger probability that the virus gets through to the lung and then creates problems. Right? Then elderly may also have a more severe pneumonia process, but that has then other reasons, because not only if you have a weaker immune system, not only does it let it happen in the first place, but once the virus is down here, it may also then not react as well to this virus down here as it would have if it was a very agile one, right? So elderly have probably a double whammy, right? First of all, they're much more likely to get a pneumonia in the first place, and second, they're more likely to have difficulty dealing with a pneumonia, meaning they are more likely to die of it than a young person. Young person can also have pneumonia, it's just less frequent, but once they have the pneumonia, they're probably better at dealing with it, and also their overall constitution is, of course, better. So their likelihood to survive pneumonia is higher. Right? So for elderly people, that's a double whammy. Right? But the key here is not to let the virus down into your lung. And that's exactly what the vaccines do, with a very high degree of efficacy. We talked about it. Right? Okay, so we have well over 200 virus strains, including, most of them are rhinoviruses. So we've talked about this before. And then some are coronaviruses, and, typical symptoms, Okay, next point. There is no vaccine for the common cold. The reason there were actually attempts, but the reason is, well, there are over 200 different viruses. So a vaccine that would protect you from a common cold, it has, as a layperson, I would say, it has two major difficulties, two major challenges that are probably very, very hard to overcome. And there's no reason, since it's so harmless, right? There's no reason to spend money on this, really. But of course, there will always be some researchers, oh, this is cool, I want to research in this area, and maybe I can do something. That's great, sure. But we don't need a vaccine for common cold. We should just trust our immune system. It works wonderfully. Anyways, there are two difficulties, right? One, this vaccine would have to be effective against all 200 plus viruses that may be involved in a common cold. Every time you get a cold, it's probably a different cocktail. It's probably never all 200 of them at the same time. It's 1 dozen or 2 dozen in a different mix, right? But over the course of your life, you probably, I don't know, but you probably get all 200 of them at some point or another, right? And even if you don't get all 200, you get a big subset of them at some point in your life. So a vaccine, to be really effective, it would have to cover more than 200 different viruses from several different virus families: rhinovirus, coronavirus, adenoviruses, enteroviruses. The reason they are split into different families is because they're probably significantly different in their structure, right? So your vaccine would have to cover them all. If it only covers some of them, some other virus will get through and it will give you a cold anyways, right? So the vaccine will not be effective. So that's the first thing. The second thing, as I just said, a common cold takes place in the upper respiratory system, as they say here too, right? Now that's a really hard thing to create a vaccine that prevents the virus from even getting up to here, right? I mean, imagine, it's so easy for a virus, let's say when we talk to each other and, I spit a little bit, which, we all sort of spit a little bit when we talk, right? Or even when we breathe, the air carries aerosols and with tiny droplets and so on, right? So even when we just breathe at each other, the virus, it's so straight to get through your mouth or your nose into your upper respiratory system. To prevent, the vaccine would basically have to hold the right antibodies ready, and for all 200 viruses, right? So antibodies for 200 viruses ready at all times, because cold we can always get. Always cold viruses going around. Right? They're seasonal, but even when it's off season, like in Europe in the summer, even then there are cold viruses going around, just less so, right? But not zero, right? There's always cold virus in the air around you at any time, right? So to create a vaccine that covers all 200 plus viruses and covers them so effectively that they even don't have a chance to colonize your upper respiratory system, which is really easy for them to do. That is a very tall order. I say that as a layperson. And I would be very surprised if anybody came up with a vaccine that can do that. And then again, it would be, and people would say, so what for? A cold is not dramatic, right? Yeah, so I'm not, I'm very skeptical that we'll ever have a vaccine against the common cold, and we don't need it, right? But that is, it all can be explained. They just say here there's no vaccine for the common cold. Yeah, but why don't they say why? I just try to explain to you why. Two reasons, I think. I say this as a philosopher, okay? Maybe there are experts who would say, Matthias, you don't get it quite right. There's other things to consider, Yeah, sure. But logically speaking, those are certainly two hurdles, right? 200 plus viruses in the cocktail, and you have to cover them all. Secondly, you have to cover them immediately before they can even settle down and colonize your upper respiratory system, which is very quick for them, very easy. It's just a breeze of air, they get there, right? So you have to have these antibodies ready at all times, ready to shoot right away, right? That's the only way to prevent a cold, right? Effectively. And our immune system naturally has made the choice not to do that. Right? So when we get infected with cold virus and we develop the right antibodies, and after about a week or 10 days, we've cleared it out, it's gone, right? And we retain some of these antibodies, but we only retain them for maybe 6 or 9 months, and then they wither away. Why? Because the immune system is very busy, it consumes a lot of energy, and it only does things that are effective and important, right? And since the cold is harmless, the immune system doesn't bother to keep all these antibodies ready at all times. It keeps them for a while, maybe just so that in the same cold cycle, you don't get the same cold twice, right? That's a bit of a relief, right? But that's all it grants us. After 6 or 9 months, the antibodies are largely gone, and we can get the same virus or the same cocktail of viruses again, right? And then the game starts again, but it doesn't matter. It's a game, but it's a harmless game, right? So the immune system has chosen not to keep these antibodies because it's not worthwhile doing. So for us to spend a lot of money on developing a vaccine that I just described, very complex, for something that our immune system naturally just says, oh, let it be, right? It's not worthwhile fighting. You have to really convince yourself that is a good way to spend your money. There's so many more dangerous things out there that you could spend your money on, right? And there are, of course, viruses or pathogens where if you inoculate or vaccinate, then you're protected for life, because those are dangerous viruses, and the immune system, once it's developed the antibodies, it will keep them for life. It will keep them at hand, so that in all likelihood, you will never get sick with that same thing again, right? And I don't know, the childhood diseases, you know, all in that category. You get them once in your life, and in all likelihood, you will not get it again. Why? Because the immune system keeps readiness at all times, because it's a fairly severe disease. A cold is not, and therefore it's not worthwhile to keep those antibodies, right? So keep this in mind, because all of what I just said, I believe, applies equally for SARS-CoV-2. Right? That's why I'm spending time on this. Oh, and sorry, before I go to the next thing, at the bottom, the common cold is the most frequent infectious disease in humans. Well, in my definition, it's not a disease. And again, when I looked up disease, I didn't check it out in Wikipedia, I have to say, but in that online English dictionary, they define disease as something that significantly interferes with your daily life or prevents you from going about your normal daily routine. So common cold in that definition is barely a disease. I mean, there may be some cases where people feel quite shitty with a cold. I mean, those cases exist, right? And some people maybe have a higher propensity than others to feel shitty, maybe just because the immune system is a bit different. But I wouldn't call that a disease. It's an infection, but it's not a disease, because the cold doesn't really, in most cases, affect your daily lives very much. Right? I mean, I remember maybe occasionally taking half a day off from work because I had such a headache in conjunction with a cold that I just didn't feel like I could work. But I don't think I've ever taken more than half a day off. Even influenza, same. So the idea that this is like a disease, I mean, we have to be a bit cautious about what do we want to call a disease and what is just an inconvenience, right? I'm talking about common cold as an inconvenience, not as a disease. Anyways, but it is the most frequent infectious thing that we humans encounter 2 to 4 times a year, and children even more often. Yeah, they're seasonal, and they've existed throughout human history. And that's the point here. We are very familiar with this cocktail of viruses, right? And so what happened this year or last year is we got one new one, and that may not be such a frequent event. Maybe that only happens every few thousand years or whatever, right? So it is not something totally trivial as we are seeing around us, yeah, because it is a challenge for even, you know, a well-functioning immune system, because it's new, right? And there's this adaptation period where, okay, I have to encounter it the first time, I have to survive that encounter as an immune system, right? And then the next time I'll be okay, right? So there is this kind of critical moment where the virus and us get to know each other, right? And that's the period we are currently going through. Anyways, okay, my commentary to what I highlighted in red. First of all, the symptoms, yeah, this sounds familiar, yeah, that's exactly what SARS-CoV-2 does, because it is a common cold coronavirus, right? And as I said earlier, I don't think it comes alone. I think it probably comes, it's already by now become part of the cocktail. It's already synchronized itself, and it's my guess. I don't know that statistically or empirically, but my guess is, because the virus is very quick in adapting to us, it's already now largely synchronized itself with other common cold viruses. So the seasonality of the other common cold virus, this virus is already mimicking. And in fact, if it came from some other mammal, which is likely, right? Let's say a bat, whose immune system is quite similar to ours, not the same, and it's maybe even more powerful because they deal with a lot of viruses, bats do. More than we do, I think. But, so it's not the same immune system, but, largely we are genetically the same, right? Very largely bats and humans are genetically almost the same. So our immune systems are probably not that different. And the bats, lost my train. What was I going to say about the bats? Anyway, so the bats may have colds. I don't know. They do, and they may be seasonal. That's what I wanted to say. So the seasonality, the SARS-CoV-2, even before it came to us, may have already been seasonal. possible, right? Or if it wasn't, it learns very quickly to become seasonal because it's very effective, right? Because it just spreads so much more effectively during the winter than it does during the summer. So it just learns it very quickly. And within 1 or 2 annual cycles is my guess, it adapts to humans and our lifestyles and the climatic conditions under which we do certain things. And probably just goes with the flow and just joins the other common cold viruses and, piggybacks on their cycles, right? Now I get back to that in a moment because there will be rivalry between this new virus and the prior ones, right? So we'll talk about the competitive dynamics in a moment. But first of all, for the virus, it's probably easiest just to go with the stream and with the flow, right? So it's probably by now become just as seasonal as all the other common cold viruses. Not perfectly seasonal, as I said. There will always be some outliers who try to be successful at those times where most of their comrades lie low, right? There will always be that innovation. We call that when businesses do that, we call it innovation, right? They innovate new things or new ways of doing things, right? And viruses, I'm sure, do that too. So, but by and large, I would expect that this virus has just already by now probably become part of the normal cocktail of common cold viruses that is going around in certain cycles and seasonalities that I don't know in detail and don't need to know. Yeah, I already said this, no? Where Wikipedia says other health problems, and what they really mean is compromised immune systems. That's the underlying factor, as I said. That's the root cause of everything we're talking about here. Yeah, so occasionally, as I said, these other cold viruses also can trigger pneumonia. And if it happens that in that common cold cocktail that triggers a pneumonia, if one of the viruses in that cocktail is SARS-CoV-2, and we've tested for that, and we say, yeah, positive, oh, one of your viruses right now that you're dealing with is SARS-CoV-2, then we may call that pneumonia, if we want, COVID-19. But that's very imprecise because we don't even know in the cocktail of viruses that we took in, whether it is really COVID-19 that is the one that came down to the lung and triggered the infection, right? Maybe we can, maybe the medical experts can then find out, but just on the basis of the PCR tests, they cannot, because the PCR test tests up here, right? And just because you have the virus, the SARS-CoV-2 up here, doesn't mean if you then get a pneumonia, it doesn't mean automatically that the two are linked, right? I mean, the probability is high for the reason I described. At this moment, if it's your first encounter, this virus is much more likely to get into your lung than any of the other common cold viruses, which you already know, which your immune system already knows, right? Yeah. So it is very likely when they say, oh, you're PCR positive and you have a pneumonia, so let's call that COVID-19. That's okay. In most cases, that will be correct. Correct in the sense that, yeah, that particular pneumonia we have chosen to call COVID-19. But I think my point here is more the other way around. Keep in mind, that's what it is. It's a pneumonia. In a way, it's no different than all the other pneumonias, right? And I think people are, when they hear COVID-19, they are afraid. When they hear pneumonia, they are not. Why? Because pneumonia they've heard since they were a little child, right? They know pneumonia, normal. But this is no different pneumonia than all the other pneumonias, okay? So, yeah, so it's again this fear factor linked to creating these names, COVID-19, sounds very threatening, right? And it's being discussed as if this is something completely new and unprecedented and very dangerous, and none of the above is true. It's neither new nor unprecedented nor particularly dangerous. I mean, pneumonia is always dangerous, especially for elderly, yes. But this one is no exception. This one is just normal, I think. I mean, from what I've seen, I mean, I've not heard anybody say, oh, this pneumonia is for some reason worse. I mean, yes, there may be differences. I said this before. If this virus particularly likes to go into our alveoli where the oxygen exchange takes place, and maybe some other cold viruses or other pathogens, if they get into the lung and trigger pneumonia, maybe they go into other parts of the tissues, or they do it in a slightly different way. and maybe they are less dangerous. I mean, this one may be particularly dangerous if it really undermines our breathing, right? And if it kills people by asphyxiation. Right? And maybe this particular pneumonia has more people dying of asphyxiation than other types of pneumonia. That may be the case, right? I would grant that, right? I don't know that, but that is possible, right? So maybe there's a good reason to say, well, let's differentiate those pneumonias. Not all pneumonias are the same. Okay. But I mean, technically speaking, that may well be the case. But for the general discussion in public, you don't hear the word pneumonia at all. People treat COVID-19 as if this is something, as I said, completely new, completely unprecedented, and completely like a different order of magnitude more dangerous than all the other things we normally encounter. And that is just simply not the case at all. Right? So the discussion is wrong, even if, I'm not saying the taxonomists or the scientists who make these distinctions or give those names, I'm not saying they are wrong, but the way we discuss it in the general public and among the politicians, how we talk about this is wrong. Okay. What's my comment here? Oh, yeah, as I said, so they say, okay, common cold occasionally can turn into pneumonia, yeah. And as I said before, because it's a new virus, that probability is much higher. It's just a probabilistic game, but the probability that it turns into pneumonia is much higher than with any of the other common cold viruses, because we already know, right? But that's only true in the first encounter. And you know my figures that I'll share later. I mean, we already, 60% or more of us have already encountered this virus. Plus, most of the rest have by now been vaccinated, right? Which is equally good, probably, right? So it does the same thing as either you're naturally exposed to the virus and you develop the blueprint for it, or the vaccine, the exposure to the vaccine triggers your immune system producing that blueprint. It probably comes to the same thing. Right? So the vaccine mimics the right thing, namely that ability of your immune system to trigger that type of neutralizing antibody that you need to prevent the virus from getting into the body. Yeah. So whether you've encountered the virus naturally or whether you've been vaccinated, it probably comes to more or less the same thing, but it means you're past your first encounter. So this virus is no longer unknown to you. So the risk is already much lower than prior to the first encounter. It may not be as low as with the 200 other viruses, because they've been around, some of them maybe for so long, in so many different variations that our immune system is not static, and the world is not static, and these viruses, of course, are not static. They mutate all the time. It's all dynamic. And, a virus that we've been exposed to for the last 1 million years, we've maybe encountered 10,000 variants of it or whatever, right? And they're all, as the name variant suggests, they're all slightly different. If they were very different, we would call it a new strain. That's the language normally used. If a virus mutates so much that it becomes significantly different from the earlier version, we call it a new strain. And the new strain is almost like a new virus for our immune system. So it's a new challenge. But a variant means it's got some change, but that change is not so big, right? Then we call it a variant. So viruses we've been living with for thousands or even millions of years, us and our ancestors, we will have encountered tens of thousands of variants, right? And so our immune system, I don't know exactly how it works. It's very efficient, very economical. It will not keep blueprints for everything. It will keep blueprints only for those things where it realizes that matters, right? So it will not maybe keep a blueprint for every single variant it has encountered, but it learns, in some way it learns to know what is worthwhile being prepared for, right? And the longer that interaction with that virus and all the different variants and maybe occasionally a new strain, of course, the more of that richness will be present in our immune system. Right? It's, as I said before, our immune system to me is like the most amazing thing after our brain. It is just tremendous what it can do, and not just humans, also in animals. It's just tremendous what an immune system can do, how flexible and adaptive it is, and how much it can learn. But of course, as you all know, learning means to some degree you need to have exposure to something, otherwise you can't learn about it, right? So I think the point here is that while you are much better off after you've encountered this new virus once, because definitely your immune system has encountered it and has created some kind of a blueprint. That blueprint, as I call it, it's a layman's term. I don't know how the virologists actually call that, but I call it a blueprint. Yeah. That blueprint is probably not as solid and foolproof as all the blueprints you have for some of the other viruses that you've encountered many times before, and in many variants. Right? You can imagine, right? And again, this is just conceptualizing something. I'm not on empirical grounds here, but I imagine that even after the first encounter, our risk of getting ill from this virus, even though it will be much lower than before the first encounter, it will not be as low maybe as with the other common cold viruses, right? Just because we know them so well, so intimately. Right? So maybe we've got to run through a number of variants of this virus and build our library, immune system's library of the different variants and all the things that can be come our way, and all the different variations in the phenotype of that thingy, and build that library. And the more we build that library, the better. The other day I was thinking of Bitcoin and how it creates sort of blockchains, right, of very solid information about something like a transaction, right? And the longer the blockchain, so it links blocks to each other, the longer the blockchain, the more precise and sort of precise and robust that particular, they call it a hash, a block of chain of blocks. The longer it becomes, the more solid and precise it becomes, right? And it's almost unbeatable by someone who would like to commit fraud, for example, right? And I'm thinking a little bit of the immune system in the same way, right? The more it encounters different variants of the virus, the more it will be refined and detailed and robust in understanding that virus in all its different variations and richness, right? So bottom line, maybe it takes years, maybe it takes decades, maybe it takes a few human generations even, until we are as attuned to SARS-CoV-2 as we are to the other cold viruses, right? But having said that, my sense is the first encounter is the critical one. If you get past that, you're already like a long way into being comfortable living with this virus, which by implication also means if you got one vaccination, that ought to do the trick. This idea now that people are already talking about repeat vaccination, and again, every time a variant pops up, yes, you can do that, but I worry that it just prevents our immune systems from doing its work. I mean, it's like I said before, if you don't exercise your muscles, they will atrophy, right? If you don't exercise your immune system, it will atrophy. If you leave it all to the vaccines to do their work, the immune system will, how convenient, thank you. I'll lean back and enjoy the ride because I'm not called upon to do anything here because some vaccine, does it for me. Cool, right? I mean, yeah, that's for the lazy immune systems, that's great, but you don't get Olympic gold medal winning immune systems if you do that, right? Over time, the more we do that, the more in my conceptual world, the more we will atrophy our immune system. So there's nothing positive about that, right? And remember, my title today is Vaccine Mania or Vaccination Mania. That's part of this, right? If we're now inundating ourselves with vaccinations against this one virus, I mean, what does it do to our immune system, and what does it do to the competitive dynamics among the viruses? I'll come to that in a moment. Right? I mean, we are interfering here with nature, right? And yeah, we do that all the time. I know that's human nature to do that. And actually, all living beings interfere with nature. They're part of nature, but they're changing the nature around them. They're impacting nature around them. That's normal. I know. There's nothing wrong with that in principle. And yes, we humans, we are very good at interfering with our environment, right? But since we are intelligent, we ought to, when we interfere with our environment, we ought to reflect on what does it mean? You know, is it good? Is it bad? Neutral? If it's good, well, in what way is it good? And if it's not so good, in what way is it not so good? And how do we trade off the pluses and minuses, right, of these policies or these technologies that we deploy? And I don't see any intelligent discussion around that with these vaccinations at all. That nobody raises their hand and says, wait a minute, is this really a good idea to vaccinate the whole population? And even repeatedly, right? Are we doing more damage than we are doing good, right? Nobody seems to be asking that question. For me, that would be, I mean, I can't ask all the questions in the world, but if I was in the field of immunology, for example, which I think would have to deal with this question among others, or evolutionary theory, those are the questions I would ask. Right? And maybe there are some people somewhere in the university departments who are asking these questions, but it doesn't come to the fore. Right? It doesn't seem to enrich the discussions we are having. Everybody seems to assume, oh, vaccine, good thing. Yeah, the more the better. Most likely that's not the case. Right? There's probably some optimal point where you say, yeah, up to a certain point, vaccines are good because it really does save some, extend some lives. But then there comes a point where they turn maybe negative in their impact, right? And where's that point? Can we try to pinpoint that point? Nobody seems to have any interest in that. Yeah, so we may be doing a lot of harm to our environment, which after all includes the viruses, right? They're part of our environment. We may be doing a lot of harm to our environment with our vaccination mania. That's what I'm pointing out here. Yeah, so pneumonia, yeah, very normal. Cold viruses can, under certain circumstances, namely compromised immune systems, can trigger a pneumonia. And whether it was a good idea to call this particular pneumonia COVID-19, I'm not so sure, but okay, we did. All I'm asking for now is to say, okay, if we want to call this COVID-19, that's fine, but can we please always say this is a pneumonia and not hide that from people? Because right now, the vast majority of people on this planet think that this is something completely new and extraordinary, right? And that is just not helpful if they believe that, and it's not the case. Okay, so the fact that we have 200 different viruses active in our sort of common cold seasonal waves means that since all of them, by definition, at one point were new to us, the event that we just witnessed over the last 18 months has happened 200 times before. So it's not a novel, it's a novel virus, but it's not a novel event. How long ago, how often, in what kind of sequence and time intervals does this happen? I don't know. Of course, it's possible some of these viruses we've had for millions of years. Our ancestors already had them, and we just they just continued, right? Some may have come to us only fairly recently. Right? It's dynamic. But this is just to say, us being exposed to a novel common cold virus is not a new thing. It's part of human life, or any life. I mean, all the organisms out there, not all maybe, but many of them are exposed to viruses, not just us. Okay, yeah. So one of the classes of viruses that make up our common cold mix are coronaviruses, and until late 2019 or so, we had 4 of them that we knew of, and now we have 5. That's all that's happened. That's all. Doesn't sound so amazingly threatening anymore, right? Once you think about it that way. That's what I'm advocating, that we think about it that way. So there's now a vaccine, but only for that one single virus. And I've said this before. This is relatively easy to do. A vaccine for one virus, and all the vaccine has to do is trigger antibody production fast enough so that the virus doesn't get into your lung. That's not a difficult brief for a developer of vaccines. And I don't mean to belittle the achievements. I think they're great. The RNA, new types of vaccines that they came up with, that's a real innovation. Also innovation in the process, especially the government authorities that approve these things. I think they did learn to be a bit quicker. So that's maybe a good thing, right? Because maybe sooner or later something more serious hits us, and then that will be useful, right? So I think there are innovations here, that is great. And we now have a vaccine for this one virus, but A, most of us don't need that vaccine, as I said many times, and B, it doesn't vaccinate you against the other 200 common cold viruses. So sorry to say, it's not a vaccine against common cold. It's only a vaccine against 1 out of 200 common cold viruses, right? So it doesn't prevent us from having as many common colds as before. Yeah. So at the bottom, they were saying this is the most frequent infectious sort of event in our lives, and it's been with us all throughout human history. I agree with all of that. And I would just add to that, and lo and behold, the same will be the case with SARS-CoV-2. Right? Once it's through some cycles of adaptation, both mutual adaptation, and I don't know exactly how many cycles. By cycle, I mean seasonal cycles. How many seasonal cycles, that call it 12 months if you want, or a year, yeah. So let's say annual cycles. So I don't know how many of those it takes. And as I said earlier, it's maybe not a step function. It's not like pre-first encounter and post-first encounter, but it's more like a steep curve where after the first encounter, you drop steeply down, and then the second, third, fourth, fifth encounter, the curve flattens, meaning your immune system still learns new things and becomes more effective in dealing with this virus, but the net gain is small with each encounter. So the key one is the first one. So what I'm saying here is, yeah, and since this is just another common cold virus, just do expect that the same will happen with this. We will just live normally with it. It's obviously endemic, obviously part of our common cold seasonal cocktail. Virus is very quick already in adapting to us and getting very good at it. And we are a bit slow because we are delaying our adaptation with all our policy means, which is not a good thing in my view. But, yes, we are delaying it, but we can't prevent it. So yes, our immune systems will adapt to this virus. We will encounter it multiple times. And, after a certain period of time, it has just completely disappeared, if you like, in that soup of 200 virus strains that we're dealing with regularly. It will not, from a practical point of view, it will no longer be distinguishable to us, right? Because symptoms will not really be distinguishable, right? It's just going to be part of our common cold experience that we all have. And yeah, it may take some time until the probability that it turns into pneumonia is as low as for all the others. But at the beginning, the first year or two, that will be a very steep drop. So that's the most important message is after one encounter, you're already very, very unlikely to ever develop a pneumonia in conjunction with this virus. That's my prediction. Here's what I wanted to say about whether this is a pandemic. So I found one other piece of information that I hadn't thought about before. So endemic infections such as common colds and seasonal flus are not considered pandemic, even though they are there all the time, right? And they do affect people in that they have some symptoms, but they're not considered pandemic. Rightly so, in my view, because if it's mild symptoms, they should not really be considered diseases. And a pandemic, by definition, deals with diseases, right? So I agree with that, right? That these endemic infectious conditions that we all have, they, unless they become a severe disease, such as pneumonia, they cannot be pandemic. But by definition, they're endemic and not pandemic. They're just there, right? However, for example, with influenza, every so often in the last century, there were, I think, 4 events that maybe count. And so I said on average every 25 years, but that may not, I mean, you know, they're not regular events, right? Maybe 50 years, and maybe 5 years or 10, but in certain intervals that are irregular. So maybe 4 times in the last century when people started to measure this. Before that, we didn't measure these things, so we don't know, right? But in the last century, apparently 4 times a new strain came about that really became pandemic. In the sense, a lot of people fell severely ill. There's pneumonia, for example, right? So there is a precedence here to say, at least with influenza, if a new strain arises and it's significantly different from the previous ones, such that a significantly large number of people have difficulties with this new strain and they become severely ill, then we call that particular event a pandemic. Yeah, so not the normal seasonal influenza, not the normal variability that happens every year. There's some variability, there's some new variants, right? But really new strains that are so significantly different that they pose a real challenge to our immune systems, right? When those occur, then we talk about a pandemic, right? That to me makes sense. And then we can apply the same logic to our current situation and say, normally a common cold virus is not pandemic. It's endemic, and since it's not a disease, it cannot be a pandemic. But if it's a new common cold virus or a significantly new, sort of different strain of an older virus, which can also happen, as with influenza, then, and if it then, therefore, because it's so significantly different for our immune system, it's basically almost new. It knows something about it, but not very much, okay? So therefore, there will be a higher propensity of cases where the virus gets down into the lung or into some other organs that can then wreak havoc. Then we have a significant number of people falling severely ill, and then it's a pandemic, right? And by that definition, the current situation can indeed or should indeed be called a pandemic. So I wanted to just share that with you, because I've been adamant in the past that I said this is not even a pandemic by that other definition. But I think by definition, as I said earlier, the Wikipedia definition, it allows it to be a pandemic. But I think this parallel here, that to me is the most compelling. That our practical usage has been to say, if there is a significantly new strain of a virus, and in the course of, because that new strain spreads successfully, a lot of people fall severely ill, an unusual amount of people, not the normal regular, I mean, influenza, that people fall ill, especially elderly, every year, but that's sort of within the normal fluctuation, but an unusual amount of people fall ill around the world because there's a new strain, then we talk about a pandemic. And I think that applies in this case. There's a new strain of common cold virus, and a significant number of people fall severely ill, and that illness we call COVID-19, because it is new to our immune systems. And therefore, by that same logic, we can call this a pandemic. And then I think then it is consistent with that usage that I found online, not in Wikipedia, but somewhere else online. So that to me is a good logic to say then, okay, so maybe the World Health Organization was correct in calling it a pandemic, and I take back my challenge to that because of this analogy, which I really think is very logical. Not relying on definitions anymore. The one definition is a bit different than the other, and then you know which way do you look at it. I think by this analogy, I'm comfortable calling this a pandemic. I think the problem with the pandemic is only this, and actually it doesn't really matter whether we call it a pandemic or not. The problem is only that governments, when they hear pandemic, apparently think pandemic equals emergency, and emergency equals emergency rights to the government, meaning they can do what they want. And all laws and the entire constitution is suspended because there's an emergency, right? So they can pass laws without going to parliament, they will get majorities, or they can just do what they want. Right? That is the problem, right? Not whether we call something a pandemic or not. In itself, that is harmless, innocent. In itself, it's innocent. But the use, what it then triggers is not innocent. But let's not blame the World Health Organization for that, right? That we have to blame our governments and to some degree our parliaments who let it happen for, and not the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization said, okay, this is a pandemic, and okay, by this analogy, I agree, it's a pandemic. That should not trigger in politicians the automatic assumption, oh, now I can do what I want. Yeah. There's no more balance of power, no more mechanisms of control. Because pandemic equals emergency equals I can do what I want. That is the fatal logic, or rather lack of logic, that the governments have been pursuing. Okay, so that's in a nutshell, and took some time, but repeated things that I said before, I know, but on a single page, if you like, here's how we should be thinking about SARS-CoV-2 and about COVID-19. Okay, some more thoughts, and then I will speed up. I thought a bit about, well, what happens next, right? What's the sort of, what's the next phase of this from the point of view of the virus, right? And so I have some quick and dirty thoughts on evolutionary theory and the theory of competition. I'm not really an expert on either, but I have some basic knowledge on both, I guess. But take this with a grain of salt, right? These are the musings of a layperson. But here are my hypotheses. A novel common cold virus like SARS-CoV-2 would normally take 2 or 3 annual or full seasonal cycles for the mutual adaptation to take place, by which time it becomes pretty much indistinguishable from all the other viruses, common cold viruses, and it disappears in the crowd. Let's hope that 2 to 3 cycles are enough. As I said, already one cycle, if everybody was exposed to the virus, then already one cycle should be really enough. But not everybody gets exposed, even naturally. That doesn't happen. Some people live on an island and the virus just doesn't get there very quickly. It takes a few years until the virus gets there, right? New Zealand maybe is this kind of isolated little paradise. Problem with the isolation is you can't get out and you can't get in. But you may have pockets, in other words, or local ecosystems in which the virus is not successful or just hasn't arrived yet. So to really spread across the entire globe and to, let's say, 99% of humankind, it probably takes 2 to 3 cycles. As I said earlier, vaccinations play in there because they accelerate that, because I do think they are good sort of mimicry of the original, good enough anyways. I mean, we don't know enough about that, but at the moment, I'm confident that the vaccine does more or less the same thing as the exposure to the virus. It may not, right? Because the virus is much more complex. The vaccine only deals with one single aspect, or maybe a very small set of aspects of that virus that it mimics. It doesn't mimic the whole virus, right? So there may be other things about the virus that your immune system doesn't learn if it's exposed to the vaccine, right? But then again, as we know, the vaccine isn't highly effective in preventing you from acquiring the virus anyway, sooner or later, right? So you will still get an infection, you just won't get sick. But you get, even if you're vaccinated, sooner or later you'll get this virus. So it's just a delay, right? So vaccines will delay the adaptation, but they will not, they kind of accelerate your first encounter, but they delay a full getting to know the virus. So we don't know yet exactly what that will do, right? So, but in a sort of a natural setting, my guess would, I mean, just looking at how quickly the virus moves, and now we had 60-something% penetration after 15, 16, 17 months, or maybe even it's 18, 19, 20 months, because we don't know exactly when it started, right? But, so if I look at that, I would say, yeah, probably 24 to 36 months. And by that time, everybody would have encountered the virus at least once. And a significant proportion of the population would have already encountered the virus or another variant already a second time. Yeah. So we are starting to get into that normal repeat sort of encounter. And, by that time, the immune system already is very well capable of containing the virus within the upper respiratory system, and therefore it will not stand out from the other viruses. That's what I mean, disappear in the crowd, right? It will just be another one of them. No, we will not even remember the name in a few years' time. Nobody will remember the name of this virus, so, especially since it's so complicated. But maybe it's a good thing that it's so complicated, because people don't remember it. Already now they don't remember the name of the virus because they always say, oh, he's infected with COVID, he's infected with COVID, he's tested positive with COVID. No, he doesn't. You cannot be infected with the disease and you cannot test positive for the disease either. Right? So already now the people are lazy using the name of this virus. So in a few years' time, we'll have forgotten the name. Yeah. Now, in the course of this adaptation, so at the moment, when the virus is new to us, it's got a competitive advantage vis-a-vis the other common cold viruses. Namely, our immune system is less capable from holding it at bay. So even if it doesn't get into the lung, but just up here in the upper respiratory system, presumably this virus right now can multiply more easily than all the others. Yeah, because it just takes us a bit longer in the first encounter to get the right antibodies ready, right? Even the 99% of us who successfully prevent the virus from getting any further than your throat, even for those, the multiplication of the virus in upper respiratory system that it colonizes will be presumably faster than that of the other common cold viruses, because the other common cold viruses, immediately when they hit us, we hit them, right? Our immune system is like, it's immediate reaction, right? This one, if it's new to us, takes a bit longer, right? So it's got more time to happily multiply, right? And then maybe also more opportunity to transmit, therefore, right? And that's what I mean by competitive advantage. So as being new, the virus may have a competitive advantage, but that's only true because it does seem to work on us really well. I mean, this first SARS virus, remember, it didn't work on us very well. It didn't find it easy to multiply and transmit, and it died out, right? So of course, being new could, first of all, is a negative for the virus, right? It means, oh, I need to be lucky enough to be good enough in my adaptability to adapt to this new host really fast, right? Otherwise I get kicked out, right? The SARS-1 was probably just outcompeted by all the other viruses, right? So first of all, for the virus to be new to us is a negative, or it's like, I don't know, traveling to a new continent that you don't know, right? The first thing is like, ooh, can I survive, right? But if you are then able to step on land like Columbus and his people and survive the first winter, well, he got to the tropics, so he didn't have the winter. But let's say the first Pilgrim Fathers, or what are they called, in North America, who settled, right? Or the Vikings, The key is, of course, first of all, you have to survive the first winter, right? If you don't, then you never get a colony, and then you're gone, right? So SARS-1 didn't survive the first winter, but SARS-2 did, right? So first of all, it managed to get in and quite successfully colonize us. In that moment, then, the disadvantage of being new to us and us being new to it turns into a temporary competitive advantage, because our immune system now struggles with it, whereas our immune system doesn't struggle with all the competitors of it. So for 1 or 2 or 3 cycles, it has a temporary competitive advantage over its peers. But with each cycle, its sort of market share of our upper respiratory system compared to the other viruses will shrink, and it will get smaller and smaller until there is some kind of a equilibrium market share, some balance of power between the different viruses. Now, so initially it has this competitive advantage of being different or new to us. That competitive advantage erodes with each cycle, but that erosion of competitive advantage, in theory, in competitive theory, ought to force it to innovate, meaning to evolve faster mutations. So loss of competitiveness relative to the other viruses may mean it accelerates its mutations. That would be at least something that you would conceptually expect, right? So again, this may be temporary until there is an equilibrium, and then it's just become one of the others and no more unique. But in the first few cycles, there is this competitive play going on, which will determine exactly what market share in the end this virus will have among the common cold viruses. And that dynamic, is a dynamic between he's losing his initial competitive advantage of being new to our immune system, but it tries to compensate by evolving faster. See, the older viruses that have been with us for a long time, over many, many generations, they don't have as strong an evolutionary pressure, right? Because they are settled in their market share, right? And they're quite comfortable with whatever it is, right? Now, there's also, of course, there's an interesting dynamic here. You throw in a new virus, like this one, maybe it also triggers the other viruses to have to mutate faster. It's almost like they were in a comfortable slumber and a comfortable market share and competitive position where everybody is just making profits. And you throw in this brand new competitor, right? I mean, if the viruses were our like old bricks and mortar retail sector, and you throw in an Amazon.com, it first of all gives Amazon.com a big competitive advantage because it's got something new. That competitive advantage will then start eroding because others will start copying it. But those older ones who were there very comfortably before, they really need to get their act together. Otherwise, they may be crowded out by this newcomer, right? So they need to get more competitive, right? So they will start innovating and do new things, not necessarily just copying Amazon, but do something that allows them to regain some market share that they lost, right? So that's competitive dynamics. And I think the same, you can imagine by analogy, again, could happen in our upper respiratory system. There's a battle going on right now. We don't notice the battle very much, but there's a battle raging between these 200 plus viruses. They're jockeying for position. And we don't really know how that plays out, right? Will this new virus very quickly become quite marginalized and maybe quite rare that we encounter it? Or will it become a dominant one of the sort of biggest market share players, in which case you may encounter it very often? From a point of view of adapting to it, that would even be a good thing, right? If it was frequent. The more frequent our interactions with it, the faster or the shorter the adaptation cycle, right? But we don't know this, but there is a competitive dynamics, which would, if I was, as I said earlier, if I was an immunologist or I don't know who the people are who deal with these, or evolutionary theorist or something like that, I would be interested in this, right? How does this play out? Now, the key question I would then throw to those people is, how do our policy measures and our vaccine rollouts impact this balance of power and this sort of, do they trigger an arms race, or do they, they basically, it's interesting, most of the policy measures, other than the vaccination, they affect all viruses equally. If you wear a mask or you stay at home, it has the same impact, presumably, on all the common cold viruses, not just on this one, right? The mask will fend off this one with 98% accuracy if you wear the mask properly, and it will fend off the other ones as well. Maybe there are some smaller and some are larger, so the smaller ones can maybe sneak through, so there may be some differences. I grant that. But generally speaking, these measures, these mechanical measures, do we call it mechanical? Someone's just staying at home and not mingling with other people. These measures affect all the 200 plus viruses equally, plus the influenza viruses, plus other viruses. This is something also not discussed at all. How big is the impact of our measures on our complete, it's just not this one virus, it's like our entire ecosystem is affected by this, right? And as we loosen up, will the influenza viruses all of a sudden shoot up, right? Because they had to lie low and were forced into a corner, right? Will we have a yo-yo effect not only on this virus, but on all kinds of other viruses as well? Will that overwhelm immune systems? Will people die because of that? Because all the viruses come back in one go, right? Because we shut the door on all of them, and then we open the door again when we exit those measures. And all the viruses, fall over us in one big swoosh, right? And what does our immune system say to that? I don't know. So we've disrupted natural cycles here quite significantly. Right? People don't seem to talk about that, but we've disrupted natural cycles. I don't know what that means to our immune systems, right? But maybe people are dying as we speak because of that, right? I mean, we will talk about excess mortality, and yes, government policies definitely killed a lot of lives. I have no doubt about that. This may be one of the things, right, that it did, right? It screws up our normal interaction with our normal viral environment, and not just viruses, bacteria, and any pathogens are affected by this. Right? The vaccine is different. For all I know, the vaccine really only affects this particular SARS-CoV-2 virus and not the others. Right? So by strengthening our immune system or allowing our immune system to have the antibodies ready, rather than first having to figure out how to produce them, it reduces that crucial time window that the virus is active, and therefore minimizes the opportunity for the virus to go into the lower respiratory system. So that's what the vaccine does it very effectively, which means also that it lowers that initial competitive advantage I talked about. So it takes away some of that competitive advantage of this new virus, right? So that could mean it reduces the risk of an arms race between the viruses, right? Or it could, and I'm not sure how the dynamic plays, or it could accelerate it, right? It would accelerate that arms race if, because our new virus loses the competitive advantage faster than it would have otherwise, it increases the evolutionary pressure on this virus in order to survive in humans. Maybe it's not 100% there yet, in terms of being sure that it's become endemic to us, right? And it increases, because it takes away some of this initial competitive advantage, it increases the evolutionary pressure on that particular virus. So we may, with our measures, especially the vaccines, we may be accelerating the mutations. That may be a good thing, because it just means we get to know more variants faster, and therefore immune system sort of gets up to speed with this new phenomenon quicker. And I would consider that, generally speaking, to be a good thing, right? Some people may disagree. They say that's a bad thing, but I think it's a good thing. So to some degree, to accelerate the evolution of this virus may be a good thing. But we don't know that, right? We don't know whether there may be some downsides to accelerating it, right? So if our vaccines accelerate the mutation of this virus, in all likelihood, that's okay or even good for us. But there's a scenario where maybe it isn't so good, right? Either because occasionally a mutation happens that is not only faster, but also has a higher propensity to get into the lung. That can happen. It's not likely, but the more mutations we allow, and even foster, the more likely it is that maybe one of those exceptions comes through, right? We cannot exclude that possibility, right? So accelerating the evolution of the virus may be a bad thing from that point of view, right? Because we don't know exactly what, even if conceptually in likelihood, we say, more likely it will be good for us than bad. Yes, I think that's the case, but it could be bad. It could also, secondly, trigger the other viruses to then also increase the mutation, right? So the rate of mutation. I don't know whether it would do that, because if this virus is held lower, then they may not care. They may know, it doesn't take a lot of market share, and they just don't react to it because the market is big enough for everybody, kind of thing, right? Or when this guy becomes super innovative, does it mean that they sooner or later will be forced to do likewise, right? So then we are in an arms race between the viruses. Yeah, so I stopped there because I'm speculating and I don't know the answers. I just know questions here. But I would hope that there are some people more knowledgeable than I about these matters, thinking about this, right? What are the evolutionary and competitive dynamics of this new virus in the context of the pre-existing viruses and in the context of our government policies and vaccination programs? Right? What can we say about the dynamics of this? And, you know, is there a view where people might say, hey, maybe we should go slow on these vaccinations because we are really not sure what effects, sort of unintended consequences it will have on the evolutionary dynamics and the competitive dynamics of our viral ecosystem. At least that needs to be considered. Currently, we are sort of blindly vaccinating everybody, just as if there is no tomorrow. And I have a bad feeling about that, but I cannot put my finger exactly on why I have that bad feeling. I'm not at all against vaccines, as you know, right? I think they do extend lives. They really do. They're effective. I'm just against this wild sort of throwing vaccines at everybody and the mother, right? Maybe at the mother, but not maybe at everybody. Yeah, the mother probably should get the vaccine. Yeah. So I have a bad feeling about that. It's just hyperactivity. It's the kind of thing that, you know, politicians do, I know, but the rest of us have to slow them down a bit, these politicians. Remember, they don't think. The thinking has to come from other people. We can't expect a politician to think. As I said before, a thinking person, by definition, would never become a politician, right? Because you have to lie all day long. That's the only way to survive. Lie, 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 and more lie. Right? No thinking person would do that. So by definition, there cannot possibly be a thinking person among those politicians. So therefore, the thinking people have to come from, you know, somewhere else around them, right? Academia or whatever, right? But yeah, I hope they will come. But so far, I'm as intrigued I am that we managed to get these vaccines very quickly. In retrospect, maybe not surprising, as I said, because it's easy. To be honest, it's easy. It's not. That's why we have 5 or 10 of them already. It's easy enough, right, for a single common cold virus. But no, I'm grateful for that. But on the other hand, other than that, the quality of our interactions with this virus and our thought process around the virus has been dismal, in my view. And that is really shocking. That is really shocking. And that's why we're in year 1 after Homo sapiens, because we are clearly not sapiens. Right? So I'm just trying to say there is a lot of things one could think about, and they may, to some people, sound theoretical or academic or what, but I wouldn't think so. I think these are very profound things we need to think about as we interact with our natural environment. Instead of just blindly impacting it without thinking about the consequences, I think we need to get better at thinking about the consequences. And this vaccination program currently is a massive, massive intervention in nature. And the policy measures, as I said, the mechanical ones, as I call them, even more so perhaps, because they affected our entire ecosystem of viruses and other pathogens. And therefore our immune systems. We are not in isolation from nature. We are totally tied up with nature. And our immune system is completely tied up with our natural environment. We may not register that in our brains, but I'm saying let's register that. And if we disrupt that interaction, we haven't even started to think about what that means for our immune systems, right? So I'm just advocating, let's do that. Let's think a little bit. Okay. One more thing, and then I get to the numbers. State we are in. So this is just, I have my coronavirus diary. I call it Corona Zeit. Just a diary that I've had since last February or March. Just, I think March, when I realized that things were getting serious and out of hand in terms of policy measures, right? I started to keep notes of things and jot down my own thoughts and comments and quotes from somewhere, etc., etc. And on 8th of July, here's what I wrote down. I just read it to you. What is the case? Number 1, fear of death, death as incommensurate and ineffable man as either God or machine. What do I mean? People, so here's the thing, right? So when occasionally I get to chat with someone about this situation, not often, very rarely now, and one of the things I hear then is, oh, but don't you agree that 4 million people have already died of COVID, right? And I say then, yeah, if you, according to my model, it's 8 million, right? And when the dust settles, it will be maybe 10 million or more. And then they say, yeah, and you're not, you seem to not sort of find that terrifying or noteworthy even. And I said, oh yeah, I find it noteworthy, but not terrifying, that's right. So bottom line, people say, but millions and millions of people die of this. And they are so concerned, right? And then I sort of say, yeah, but there are, 8 billion of us, 7.9, yeah? 7.9 billion of us. If, let's say, 10 million out of the 7.9 billion die of COVID, this particular type of pneumonia, that means that 7.89 billion don't die of COVID. They die of something else. They all die, right? That's sort of my point. Everybody dies. It's just a question of when and of what, right? And the of what, I'm really puzzled why people are so hung up on dying of pneumonia. That's the most common thing in humanity. I've said that many times before. So I'm puzzled why that is so frightening to people. Right? I find it much more frightening to think about dying of cancer, which may take years, and, wreck you away slowly. I don't know why that would be preferable, right? Now, that's a much more likely fate for us than dying of COVID, much more likely, right? COVID fatality is 0.2%. If you take all cancers together, it's probably 25%. This is several orders of magnitude bigger than COVID. Right? But so this fear of, and then maybe but this is so imminent. No, it's a fear of death. And death is something that is, people cannot fathom. It's ineffable. You can't talk about it. And they pretend that they're either a god who is immortal or that they're a machine, which is kind of sort of also immortal, or it just sort of stalls at some point, right? For a human being, it shouldn't be a problem to face death. And of course, this death for most people is not particularly imminent because it's so unlikely that you die of COVID, right? Very unlikely. So, if it was an imminent death, like you're facing someone with a machine gun and he's about to point the machine gun at you, I'm sure I would be very afraid in that moment, right? But this is not an imminent threat of that type, right? So I wonder, so there seems to be this underlying fear of death that I cannot get my head around, I guess. Yeah. And then people say, yeah, but okay, yes, people have to die, but it's about the timing. If you die of COVID now, that may have shortened your lifespan by X number of years. Yeah, but not maybe by as many years as people think, right? I think I talked about this last time or 2 times ago. Early on, some researchers in Europe said, oh, the average lifespan of the average 80-year-old in Europe is another 10 years. So I think they, in Italy or something, they discovered that at that time, that the average age at which people died of COVID was 80. Maybe it was 79, but let's say 80, just as a round number. And then they went and said, well, for someone who is today 80, what is their statistical lifespan, their remaining lifespan? And it's almost 10 years, maybe it was 8 or 9 years or so, yeah? So almost 10 years. And they came, because some people had said, yeah, but these people are old, they would die anyways, and they came back and said, no, their average lifespan is 10 years. So that's significant, 10 years, yeah. Then I said last time, yeah, but these people aren't average because they have a weakened immune system. by definition, they are below average, right? The lifespan wouldn't have been 10 years. The 10 years is for the average 80-year-olds, but these are not the average. These are the particularly sensitive, people particularly sensitive to, infections, right? So if they hadn't died of COVID, they might have died next year of influenza, right? So there, I don't know what their lifespan is, but it's less than the 10 years that are the average. Point being, yes, you will take away some lifespan. So COVID does lower the lifespan of a certain number of people, 10 million, let's say. I accept that. I mean, there's no doubt that that's the case. Yeah, but if you think about the impact of all our measures and how many man-years they will cost, and they've just started. I mean, some of these economic impacts will be felt in some parts of the population in some countries for years to come, right? Starvation, not getting the right medicine. I mean, all kinds of things have been disrupted by these measures. Plus all the things that I said about our impact on the dynamics of our whole environment of pathogens is unclear, right? And so on and so on. I mean, there are so many things. So the number of man-years lost to COVID in the end will probably be minute, or at least modest, in comparison with the man-years lost by all these measures. So again, why are people so afraid of an infectious disease and not of all kinds of other ways of dying, right? So there is something here that I don't understand. Secondly, resistance to thinking, to truth, to rationality, to resignation to authority. I've talked about that many times, so I don't need to do that again. The expert said, therefore I don't have to think. That's externalization of the root cause and socialization of responsibility, and I call that herd mentality. So externalization of the root cause, as I said, the root cause is our individual personal immune system not working perfectly. That's the root cause of COVID-19. We are externalizing that, even though that is not infectious or cannot be transmitted. Right? We externalize our individual, if you like, defect, our defective immune system to the rest of the population, including all of those people who have no problem with their immune system, such as all the young people. The young people are not allowed to go to school because some of the older ones have a problem with their immune system. So we are externalizing the root cause to people who have actually nothing to do with that, right? Who are not affected. Right? I think that is unethical, that's criminal, but it's also just entirely thoughtless. And when I confront my mother, who is sort of my sparring partner for this, although she doesn't like to be, when I say, yeah, because of you're 84, and now she's 85, congratulations, because you are 85 and your immune system is likely to be not quite 100% up to scratch, although it probably still is not bad, right? But because of you, your granddaughter cannot go to school. When I say it that way, which is a very stark way of saying, no, I would never want that. I would no, that's wrong, right? Yeah, but that's exactly what we're doing. Right? The grandchild for I don't know how many months could not go to school because some people having a kind of a faulty logic think that that's a good way to protect the grandmother. And the grandmother would never want that. She doesn't want to see the life of her grandchild destroyed because of her immune system, right? And again, her immune system may actually be fine, right? It's just a probability thingy, right? So anyway, so this externalization of the root cause that is not contagious, but we are exporting it to all others, making all others co-responsible for our faulty immune system. And we are socializing the responsibility, right? Instead of taking responsibility for our own health, We say, no, society, government, please, government has to do this, government has to act. Yeah. Instead of taking responsibility for our own health. I think I said last time, maybe I say it again. In this respect, I concur with ex-President Donald Trump. Remember, he took all kinds of weird things as a prophylactic, right? And he talked openly about it, right? And at some point it became ridiculous because he was saying, if hand sanitizer works so well against viruses, why don't we incorporate it, drink it, or something like that? And at that point, of course, people started to really laugh at him, right? Because that's obviously dangerous and ridiculous, right? But he had also been taking, I think, a malaria prophylactic, right? And maybe something else. And he was also talking about, let's get antivirals going and so on. Antivirals have their own problem, which is, you have to give them as early as possible to be effective. And in this virus, we usually don't know that you have the virus until it's almost too late. Almost too late for the antiviral to have an impact on it, because it's almost on its way out already, right? Because the immune system then kicks in and gets rid of it. And even if it's in the lung, then we saw the studies showed that the antivirals they tried out didn't have a huge effect, right? They had some effect, but not a huge effect. So it's not easy, right? It's not easy to find prophylactics and to find other things to protect your immune system. Or if you can't protect your immune system, at least to bolster it or to strengthen it or to support it with, with things such as antivirals. I mean, it's not easy. But in my view, there could have been a whole cocktail of things we could have done, but we didn't. I mean, as soon as it looked like we would have a vaccine, everybody got single-mindedly focused on the vaccine. And yeah, the vaccines work, so I agree with that. But, we could have, even before the vaccines, we could have done far more things, I think, to protect people, vitamin D and, all the things that are known. But people have been very dismissive of that. Again, and I think it's because they're just socializing the responsibility. Instead of the individual saying, okay, what can I do for my immune system to either protect it, wear a mask, or strengthen it, some prophylactic, or if I do catch COVID-19 and I'm seriously ill, have oxygen everywhere so people can get quick breathing help, have antivirals and have other things that may then help to minimize inflammation and support the immune system in doing the cleanup work, right? The entire life cycle from infection through, the infection becoming a disease because the virus got down here, to you having to live through that disease and hopefully survive it. That whole life cycle, there are things along the way that you could have done. But it is an individual thing, right? And instead of saying, how can I protect myself? They just went out, government, you have to close everything down. Yeah, I mean, I'm not only blaming the governments here, right? They had huge majorities in many countries supporting them breaking all the laws, right? So you cannot just blame the governments. Huh? The majorities were often on their side and clamoring for this, for basically their rights being taken away from them and their responsibility. Right? Yeah. It's almost like people like to trade their rights for the responsibility. Oh, you take my responsibility away, then okay, you can take the rights as well. Because yeah, rights come with responsibility, right? They are linked, right? So I think a lot of people say, oh, I don't want the rights because then I also don't have the responsibility. Yeah, but that's not really how democratic or even any kind of human societies work, right? It certainly hasn't worked in this case, that's for sure. And here I'm back to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, for whatever ridiculous things he may have said, right, that were ridiculous, and I don't endorse ridiculous things. It's obviously ridiculous, but the underlying philosophy, if you like, of what he was saying, I concur with. He was basically saying, don't call for the government to lock you down. Do what you can do to protect yourself. Take responsibility for your own health. I think that's the underlying instinct. And I'm not saying he's an intellectual who figured this out intellectually. I don't think so. But his instinct tells him the first line of defense got to be each individual human being. Before you call for massive state intervention, think about what you can do. Of course, the state can support that. It must support that. I'm all in favor of that. I said that many times. Whatever tax increases were necessary to fund all these things, I would have all endorsed all of them, right? If they were, I mean, if these were sensible measures, right? What I don't endorse is that in an entire economy, global economy is shut down only in order to take the responsibility away from each individual. And to this day, you feel like individuals are refraining from taking responsibility for themselves. And it goes all the way into now the vaccination harassment that now people experience. We are now seeing citizens hounding down people who don't want to be vaccinated. This is an individual choice, and they're taking individual responsibility for their health. And that's exactly right. But there are like tons of people now hounding them or getting their governments to hound them because they want to make their own personal choice about their own personal health. I think that is fundamentally wrong. And in that respect, Mr. Trump was fundamentally right, in my view. Right? Because the root cause of this is not a social or a communal or even, if you like, a biological thing. It's an individual immune system. That is the root cause of COVID. And only the individual can take responsibility for that. And if someone wants to have a shitty lifestyle in terms of what they eat and how much they exercise, and they have every right to do that, but then they should know that it affects the immune system. Right? And if they then get hit by some virus, please then do not shout out for government policy to support your immune system that you destroyed with your own choices, right? And I say this again and again, yeah, all of us want to get old, but it's an individual thing to get old. The benefit is individual. If you can luckily become 90 years old or 100, that is your benefit. But the risks associated with becoming 90 or 100 are also your risks. Yeah? So I'm not against people wanting to get old, by all means, right? Maybe I will want to get old too, but how can you privatize that benefit for yourself, but socialize the risks to everybody else? How can you do that without having sleepless nights? I don't get it. I would have very sleepless nights if I were doing that. Okay, number 4. And a weak, non-existent intuition of freedom, free will, and self-determination. And that's, I call slave mentality. So I distinguish that a little bit from the herd mentality. But they are related, right? And again, I think there Trump has the right instinct. That basically with freedom comes responsibility. If you want to be a free individual, you also have to take the responsibility for yourself, right? And vice versa. Right? And if you now say, oh, that Matthias sounds like you're sort of a hardcore conservative or whatever they call it, in the Republican in the US, right? Then I would say, I am not thinking in those terms. Maybe there is an alignment here, that's possible. By the way, I don't vote. It doesn't matter what alignment. But I'm not thinking in those terms. I don't care. I don't know who these Republicans are. Even Trump, I know almost nothing about him other than what the public media portray him. I'm just having my own thinking, right? And to me, and this you as the audience can disagree, but to me, freedom is the most important value. And with that freedom, and that's individual freedom, first of all. Of course, there can be something like collective freedom or freedom within a collective and limitations to your freedom in a collective. All of that is understood. But the basic of human existence, in my view, is individual freedom, meaning you make your own choices and you take responsibility for them within the law. and the law is always a collective, right? That cannot be otherwise. I mean, we are social animals, and we need a set of rules by which us individuals, agree to play. But within the framework of the law, the individual must be free, and therefore they must be responsible, and they must be held responsible. And that we have broken. We have broken that linkage. We've basically said, oh, don't worry, you don't have to take responsibility for your own health. No, the government will do that. Society at large will do that. Therefore, you can't get any freedoms either, because you can't have one without the other. And the vast majority of humans around the world in the last 18 months have said, yes, please. Yes, please. And to me, that's shocking. I feel like a complete outsider. I feel like a complete sort of marginalized minority. And that's shocking to me. I didn't realize that was the case. Yeah. So those were my diary thoughts. Okay. So since I like to talk about human madness, I think this is madness. You may disagree. I end that first part with a thought that came to me just the other day. When we talk about pandemic and endemic. Human madness is not pandemic, it's endemic. It won't go away. Welcome, Matthias, to the real world. Okay, let me take a quick break and do some relaxed breathing. And I invite you to do likewise. Just 1 minute of deep breathing. And you can just make sure you sit comfortably, and you may want to close your eyes. And maybe just observe the airflow through your nostrils. You can observe your belly rising when you breathe in, dropping when you breathe out. And just relax. Yeah, welcome back. So we get to the second part, which is our monthly presentations of prizes. The 3 Silly Monkey Prize for notable steps taken towards destroying our humanity. I'll run through it quickly, I promise. The New York governor declares gun violence a health emergency. So here's an interesting case. I said this already last year. Once you open the door to treating, anything you want as an emergency, and then acquiring or granting yourself special powers, once you get through with that, with your electorate, once, you will do it again. And here we are, Mr. Cuomo, who is the governor of New York. I don't know whether he's Democrat or Republican, I didn't check. But he has now declared gun violence as a public health crisis and made several comparisons with COVID-19 and the resulting public health response. So here we go. So here you have a US governor saying, I want to treat gun violence as a health emergency, just as I did COVID, because then I can use any kind of special powers and implement any kind of policies that I would normally, under normal circumstances, not be allowed under the law to deploy. I think this is classic, right? This is exactly the kind of case I had in mind, although I didn't think of this particular case, but how politicians, having been successful with making all of us believe that it's okay to have these emergency rights, they now will declare whatever they like as a public emergency. And he even calls it a health emergency. It's funny. Yeah. And before you know it, I mean, we have the Philippines where that president, you know, systematically kills people because they may or may not be involved with the drug trade, right? It's the same kind of thing, right? People just declare something as either an emergency or war. Remember, war on terror in the US, war on drugs, right? War on the virus, right? And they just declare it as an emergency or as a war, and immediately, oh, then I can do what I want. And the law does no longer apply. We've suspended the law because we're in a state of emergency. Brilliant. We will see a lot more of this, that's for sure, because it worked so well for the politicians. On this occasion, there will be plenty of them who will take advantage of this. And I said many times, especially in the totalitarian states and the authoritarian states, of course, naturally, you expect that to happen, right? They do that all the time, right? They find any kind of reasons to do what they want to do. But this is a democracy, I think, New York, and you see it there. So I think this is a nice one. France, so Macron holds a big speech. Last July, run up to Bastille Day, the national day of France, right? And declares that health workers, it's mandatory for all health workers to be vaccinated. So here you have one of those steps that I was talking about previously. The governments will de facto more and more force the vaccinations on us, and they may not say so because they are afraid of saying that that's what they're doing, but they will, right? And it's not only health workers here, it's like access to places like shops, bars, long distance train journeys. So basically you're excluded from public life unless you comply with the government's wish that you get vaccinated. And this may become an endless thing. I said this before, right? I mean, this is not just one vaccination, right? We will have new variants, and you know, they may make us vaccinate like twice a year for the rest of our lives, right? They could, right? As long as they declare this to be some type of emergency, they can make us do this, right? They can force it upon us in some way or another. And here you have a classic example. Vaccine mania, that's why I call this session that way. Now this one is a great one. I love this one personally. Rutte, the dear Dutch Prime Minister, apologizes for lifting COVID-19 restrictions. He said the decision to ease measures had been a miscalculation. Now this is 12th of July also, same date. Vast majority of Dutch people already at least vaccinated with one shot, or if not with two shots, and among those who actually have a risk, measurable risk, probably a very large proportion already vaccinated. But here you have this doublespeak of governments. On the one hand say, oh, you must get vaccinated. The only way for us to get out of this crisis is through vaccinations. They say that, no, in all countries, right? Complete nonsense, but everybody says it, right? But then they turn around and say, yeah, but I don't really trust these vaccines. You know, we cannot be sure that they actually do what we think they do, right? So I want everybody to be vaccinated, but I don't actually believe in the vaccination. Actually, I could have put this into the Homeric laughter. Remember, I created a new category of prize, which is the most ridiculous government U-turns. I mean, this would have fit there, but I didn't bring that category today. Sorry. Yeah, this would have been a good fit for Homeric laughter. I mean, how more zigzaggy can you become? Right? You must vaccinate, but don't trust the vaccination. No. We don't know that they actually work. Brilliant, brilliant. It's like shooting yourself into the left foot and then, oh, that hurts so much. Then I shoot myself into the right foot as well. Then at least the pain is equally distributed. That's Mr. Rutte. A brilliant, brilliant guy. Yeah. No, there is no miscalculation. The vaccines have been proven to work, Mr. Rutte. Don't worry. But apparently, and then he apologizes. This is the best thing. He apologizes to his citizens for not returning their rights that are theirs. I know, sorry, he apologizes for returning the rights that are theirs. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm giving you your rights. Oh, how could I do that, right? And you know, funnily, the majority of Dutch probably said, how dare you give us our rights? We don't want our rights. Remember the previous slide? I said the rights come with some responsibility, right? So the majority of Dutch folks say, no, we don't want our rights. No, keep them, keep them. Human madness is not pandemic, it's endemic. And here's a wonderful example of that. Here's another one that I thought is intriguing. It's a bit different, but it's not a government this time. It's the Spanish court, the Supreme Court, or the Constitutional Court, not the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court. So it's the court which looks after the Constitution. De facto, it must be out of a job now because, of course, like all the European countries, the Spanish have abolished their constitution, right? But under the general illusion that that is not the case, they're continuing to do their work, which is funny in its own right. In Germany, in 2 months, we will have elections for government. There is no Germany. The Federal Republic of Germany does not exist if it doesn't have a constitution, because it's based on its constitution. So to elect a government is completely illogical. There's no government if there's no state, right? And there's no state if there's no constitution. So we would first have to reinstall the constitution. Then you can have your elections, right? But we're not doing that. Yeah, the constitution continues to be suspended, right? So and not only in Germany, but also in Spain. So actually the Constitutional Court doesn't exist. But they pretend that they exist. Okay, let's look at what they do. So this is interesting. So a far-right party, Vox, filed a petition arguing that the measures, the COVID measures, or some of the COVID measures were unconstitutional. So this is another interesting thing. Apparently, only the far-right parties are raising even a concern regarding our constitutions, our basic rights. In Germany, I didn't know that about Spain until I saw this article, but in Germany it's the same. It's only the far right, and maybe that terminology far right is no longer applicable. Maybe they're actually the center party now, I don't know. But the so-called far right party, AfD it's called, are the only ones who made at least some noises about our human rights being suspended. So there's something funny. And maybe it's got something to do with Trump as well, right? Because maybe some people would say he's also far-right guy, maybe in the view of some people, I don't know. I don't know the definition of far-right, actually. I don't think it's well-defined. But there are parties or people who are considered by many as being sort of on the far right, meaning almost extreme in their views, right? But they are the only ones at the moment, apparently, defending our basic rights. Isn't that what the center should do? Any center of any kind of democratic distribution of. So either these are not in fact far-right parties, they're actually parties of the center, or there is something fundamentally wrong with our party system. Right? The majority of parties, including all those that consider themselves to be, established parties or folks parties or people's parties. In Germany, they call themselves, they like to call themselves, meaning they have large, they don't have a majority in parliament by themselves, but they have large minority blocks. Right? Maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with them because they are the ones who suspended the constitutions. And apparently only people at the far right see anything wrong with that. That is disturbing. Because historically in Germany it was the other way around, right? It was the far-right parties, Nazis, and there were other far-right parties that were the ones suspending the constitution. Now they're the only ones, and they're not a Nazi party, but they're not that far different in some respects from the Nazi party, the AfD. But they're the only ones apparently now calling for the rights to be reinstalled. There's something fundamentally wrong with the whole party landscape, at least in some of these European countries. So that's interesting. So in Spain, you have the far right party saying, hey, wait a minute, isn't it unconstitutional to lock us up in our house? But what's really interesting to me is it's taken, I don't know when they launched a petition, but it's taken them obviously a long time. I mean, they're now 17 months into this, right? It's taken the court 17 months to decide, oh, yes, it's actually unconstitutional. I mean, any 5-year-old knows that, right? I mean, it's so obviously unconstitutional. We don't need a constitutional court, and we don't certainly need it to take 17 months to figure that out, right? Everybody can see that this is unconstitutional, right? And it was visible last March that it is unconstitutional. So I'm a little bit heated about this kind of, oh, the court now decided about after 17 months of deliberation, oh yeah, this is unconstitutional. I mean, I know a court has to go through the ropes and they have to follow due process. Yeah, but everybody knows that this is unconstitutional, right? It is so visibly, blatantly unconstitutional, but it's not being debated. And I think even in Spain, this kind of judgment by the Constitutional Court, I don't even think it raises the level of the debate even in society very much. People just shrug it off. It's just a constitutional ruling. People completely disdain their own constitution. They put no value on their constitution, apparently. And the other interesting thing here is that the court only ruled that some of the articles in the state of emergency that the Spanish government called, so this was about the Spanish government last year calling a state of emergency, right? And they even use Vox argues, this my argument, not state of exception. Yeah. So they use the same argument I'm using, apparently. And the court decided that only some of the articles were unconstitutional. That's interesting too, because it means some of the articles were apparently not unconstitutional. Now that's very, I mean, I don't know exactly what articles they're talking about here, but I mean, it's very hard to see anything that was done in terms of measures that were not unconstitutional, right? Not blatantly unconstitutional. So this whole thing looks a bit like a charade. It's almost like a democracy saying, yeah, of course we have distribution of powers, and we have the judicative or jurisdictional power. And yeah, of course, you're welcome to appeal to them. It means nothing. Court says, yeah, some of these things were unconstitutional. Yeah, but nothing happens. I mean, isn't there a death penalty for those people who behaved unconstitutionally in the government? No, instead they're still there. We're fighting a war. Nothing happens. I mean, whether really death penalty is the right penalty, we can debate. But I mean, this is a severe crime against humanity that literally all of our governments continue to commit. And the court says, yeah, some of these things are unconstitutional. Oh, who cares, right? I mean, there's something so fundamentally wrong, at least in some parts of Europe. Maybe I just focus on those in terms of perception of these countries thinking of themselves as democracies, and the epitome of freedom and rights and so on, and they point fingers at other countries all the time. Oh, your human rights record is bad. Yeah, but they have like 0 human rights now in Europe. So this is such a double speak, such a hypocrisy. It's mind-boggling. Oh, this is a nice one. England scraps quarantine for fully vaccinated EU and US visitors. Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, first of all, not for everybody, mind you. No, only for countries that are economically the most important. Yeah, you can, it's obvious, right? Those are the two biggest trade partners of the UK, right? EU and US, right? Yeah. So this is not actually about giving people their rights or treating everybody as equal, or going by some kind of objective criteria, such as how is the situation in terms of vaccination levels or circulation of the virus or anything else. No, this is just simply, these are our two biggest trade partners. They are the two biggest sources of incoming tourism. They are also the two biggest destinations for our people who want to travel. So, hey, let's discriminate. Wonderful. I mean, you can't be more openly discriminatory than this, right? And then, of course, even more importantly, only fully vaccinated visitors are welcome. So here we are, vaccination mania, governments again, just like Macron, enforcing upon us, you don't have to vaccinate, but we're not treating you like a human being if you're not vaccinated. Right? This is exactly what I anticipated 6 or even more months ago, right, when the vaccine started to show promise. I not 8, 9 months ago, right? And the first trials very positive, like September, right? I mean, this is exactly what I said would happen, right? And now it's happening. And it's happening in the US. Now, luckily to the Americans, the US president doesn't have a whole lot of powers in this respect, but he has power over the federal workers. So federal workers required to get vaccinated. Initially, he actually said they must get vaccinated. Then he backtracked apparently and said, or they have to wear mandatory face masks and weekly testing and distancing. Apparently, he checked with his legal team, and the legal team says, this may not be constitutional, Mr. President. So then he said, oh, then I don't make it mandatory, but if you don't have it, then you get all these chicane, these impositions on your, which in my view are no less against the constitutional rights of people than the vaccination pressure. So actually, you're just exchanging one unconstitutional measure with another unconstitutional measure. But so be it. Right? And then he says something like, it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. I mean, that's lovely, right? That is back to my, remember I was talking about the Copernican revolution and how currently everything is like upside down. This is about as upside down as it gets, right? It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. 99% of people don't benefit from this vaccine at all. 99% of people have looked after their immune systems, Mr. President. They've taken responsibility, at least to some degree, for their health. And now they are the ones being punished because they're naturally saying, actually, I don't feel like getting vaccinated. I don't think I need it. I mean, I personally did get vaccinated, but only because I'm in a place, if you don't get vaccinated, you're basically probably halfway in jail. But I mean, if I didn't have to get vaccinated, certainly I would not get vaccinated because there's no reason for someone like me to fear that I am particularly vulnerable to this virus. So no, I wouldn't have get vaccinated, but it's enforced, right? No, this is a pandemic of the stupid. It's not a pandemic of the unvaccinated. It's a pandemic for those people whose immune systems are weak. And they have to live with that. And that's it, But so we are very far away from turning the truth sort of back onto its feet. Right? At the moment, we are always getting, from our politicians, we're always getting the opposite of the truth. Not just some falsehood, but 180 degree. It doesn't get more false than that. The opposite of truth. The blatant untruth. Brilliant. So here's the winner. Da, 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 da. Yes, and it's Emmanuel Macron and Joe Biden. I've picked on those two. I mean, I could have picked on Johnson for the travel thingy, and I could have certainly Rutte with his fantastic U-turn, but as I said, maybe he would have fit into the other category better. But I picked on these two gentlemen here because I think France and the US tend to be the two countries, more than any others, claiming that they're sort of the home of freedom and the home of democracy. And they're obviously not at home. Both of them now launched a vaccination war on their own citizens. If you are not vaccinated, I'm coming after you with heavy guns. That's what we are now dealing with. I'm like that monkey there. Right. And the Lady Liberty Prize, it's a sad story, Miss My Prize, and not being very successful in handing out my lovely prize. Now there's one noteworthy finalist, and that's actually Boris Johnson, for change. I mean, you can win one prize and the other, right, depending on what you're doing, right? So Boris Johnson, or some people around him, declared Freedom Day in the UK. And of course, that's a bit laughable because it's, of course, a partial freedom. And it's not even, I mean, it's just handing back some of their basic rights that were stolen from them. It's, you know, it's Restitution Day to some degree rather than Freedom Day, but it's only partial restitution. What I did think remarkable, and I would give Boris Johnson credit for that. I think I've noticed before that he zigzags more than most politicians, right? I mean, he can go in one direction one day and then a completely different direction the other day and then back again, right? I mean, he is the most zigzaggy of all politicians, right? Some people would say he's wily and some people would say he's agile. I mean, if you want to put it positively, right? You would say, yeah, well, he's adaptable and the situation changes and he's very quick to adapt. Yeah, well, very quick. But here he has sort of, I think, adapted in the right direction as far as I'm concerned, and it's noteworthy. Again, this is not a complete freedom. This is a partial freedom. This is just a partial reconstitution of human rights, but better partial than none at all, right? So that's the first thing. But more importantly, it came in a context where in the UK, the SARS-CoV-2 cases were clearly rising again, and driven by the Delta variant or what. Clearly, I mean, by the time of the 19th of July, you know, they were like really high. And Boris Johnson said, we need to, nevertheless, now or never, we have to take this step. We need to get back to normal. And we cannot every time, just because the numbers go up, the infection numbers, you know, revert back to you know, the lockdowns or the measures or the not lifting them. That I think is remarkable and deserves a notification here, because most politicians don't dare to do that. Rutte didn't, right? Remember, he loosened the measures a bit and gave the people a little bit of their freedom back. Cases started rising a little bit, and immediately he's like, oh, I made a mistake, a miscalculation, and I'm so apologetic about it, right? Which is complete nonsense, right? Boris Johnson, at least he didn't do that. He said, I stick to my timeline now. You know, we've talked about it at length, and we believe that the vaccines work. And, you know, we cannot delay forever going back to normal. And we shall not be derailed by a temporary rise in cases. And I think that is correct. So here you have the Boris Johnson that I can sympathize with. There's also another Boris Johnson which I can't. Again, he flip-flops all the time, but in this case, I think he's sticking to his guns, and of course he's worried about the economy, as we saw, as I said earlier, right? He's not actually worried about human rights, right? He doesn't care, right? And since his citizens don't seem to care, why should he care even, right? No, but this is about getting the economy back on track. The UK is trailing other European countries in terms of economic recovery. Their stock markets are trailing, right? And so on. So I think there's a lot of pressure on Boris Johnson from all kind of corners to lift, you know, these restrictions and get Britain back on track. So I think this is an economic policy and not a ethical or a rights question for him. But nevertheless, he sticks to his guns despite rising cases, and that breaks the pattern that we've seen in Europe, where that Rutte and others embody, which is whenever there's some rise in the figures, and as I always say, these figures are irrelevant, right? The case figures are irrelevant, but they don't understand that. But that's where they are like a person hypnotized by a snake. They are just focusing on that one number. And so whenever the numbers rose, they would backtrack on any kind of loosening policy, right? Or they would impose additional measures. Here's the first time, I think, where very clearly a European politician has said, let's stop doing that. He hasn't quite said it that way. He doesn't. I don't think he means to set a rule here. He is too wily for that, too agile. It's not a principle, I think, that he established here. It could have been a principle, but I don't think, I don't think someone like Johnson has any principles. But in this particular case, he sticks to his guns and doing the right thing. And maybe that's just a coincidence, but I want to highlight that. Does it mean he gets the Lady Liberty Prize? No. It's not good enough, Mr. Boris Johnson, to win my valuable prize. So you get a mentioning as a finalist, but I'm not giving you a prize. To get this prize, you have to really give people their freedom back without buts and ifs and conditions attached to them. Lots of conditions attached to those rights right now. Right? And secondly, you have to raise it to a principle. You have to go and say, look, these are people's basic rights, and we cannot keep an emergency because it's just wrong, right? And we have to return these rights to people, right? If as a principle, then he would get this prize. But he's just flip-flopping. Oh, economy poor. Oh, we need to do something. And tomorrow he will have some other. Tomorrow he will declare Unfreedom Day. He will have no problem doing that, right? So no, I don't think he deserves our Lady Liberty Prize, but he did deserve a mentioning, because it's breaking the narrative of linking everything you do to those case numbers that I've been arguing against now for 17 months. Finally, here is a European politician who actually does that. He delinks his policy from those figures. And that, I think it's worth the mentioning. It's not quite worth the Lady Liberty. Okay, that brings us to our scenarios and our numbers. Scenarios we don't have to talk about. We are still in the same place. And you might say, why? Aren't the vaccination programs effective? Aren't we starting to open up? Yes, some countries are starting to open up, but only selectively and only bilaterally and only with conditions attached, such as, oh, only if you're fully vaccinated, then it applies to you, and otherwise it doesn't. So all kinds of discriminatory and all kinds of exclusionary, I think is the word, conditions attached to this, and that is not going back to an early spring. That is not, to me, an effective global response. And there's only some countries, not the whole world, saying, let's bang our heads together and do this jointly. No, not at all. Some countries going this way, some countries going that way. Some countries now, because of these national policies that were so divergent, we talked about that many times before. Remember, I had this, early on, I had this sort of divergence chart where I said, oh, the policies are so divergent. That leads us into the fractured world, right? And one of the effects is that some countries are basically now through this, and other countries are still at the very beginning. I mean, Thailand or Vietnam, they're just getting started. So there's a huge divergence among countries. No? So the world will remain fractured for some time to come. And maybe at some point I'll just stop using these scenarios, because we're not going anywhere. No matter, yes, we are rolling out lots of vaccines everywhere, but it doesn't do anything. Yeah, because every country does their own thing, and it doesn't create effective global response. It may have here and there in some specific locality, there may be effective responses now with the vaccine. Of course, the way we use the vaccine is not efficient at all. I mean, most of them are given to people who don't need them, but they're still effective insofar as that small fraction of people who actually do benefit from them, they also get it, right? I mean, they're among that much larger group of people who are being vaccinated now. It's not focused on the right people, but it's just sort of scattergun. Everybody will get vaccinated. But, yes, if you do that, of course, those who should get vaccinated will tend to be among them, right? So yeah, we are getting to a point where most people will be vaccinated, like it or not, including those who never wanted to be vaccinated, right? But I'm not seeing any going back to normal. I mean, if the UK says we're opening up, they're not even opening up fully. I mean, they're just saying no more quarantine for US and EU travelers. Yeah, but how about the rest of the world? I mean, that's not reducing our fracturedness, right? If you do bilateral deals like that, right? Now, it may be a stepping stone, and eventually they will add more countries and more bilaterals. And at some point, then they say, okay, everybody else will be treated accordingly as well. But we may be many, many months away from that. Okay, numbers. What happened this month? Where did I put my camera? There. Well, the main thing that happened is that the Center for Global Development is a think tank, I believe, a non-profit, I think, did a study of India because it said, oh, there seem to be a lot of fatalities that are unrecorded, which, yes, everybody, I think, knows that. But they really wanted to have a better view as to, how many. And they did a study, which I didn't read the whole study. I only read the summary, but it seems quite reasonable to me. They did 3 different methods to triangulate the actual number of fatalities. And they ranged, the 3 methods, one method was similar to my method, which is using the serological data. They then refined that data a bit using some leverage, and I didn't look in the detail, but their number then becomes a little bit higher than my number, but it's similar. So one of the 3 methods basically mimics my method. And then they had 2 other methods. One was really interesting. They had bottom-up local government data from earlier this year when there was a lot of cases in some federal states in India. And they got some real bottom-up data of actual fatalities registered with municipalities and so on. Now, those may not be fully representative. They may not be representative across time, right? Because they may have been taken at peak times when maybe a lot of unnecessary fatalities happened because everything was so crowded in the hospitals, etc. Everything was overwhelmed, and oxygen masks not available and all that. So these sort of the local bottom-up data that they managed to collect may not be representative of all of India geographically, and also not representative of the entire 17 months that we've now gone through, because they only related to a few months earlier this year. They didn't relate, for example, to what happened last year. But they're quality data in that they're bottom-up and we have real statistics there. And you have to make amends for them, maybe not fully be representative for the whole country, but you can't ignore them. And they're actually quite high. And then they had a third method, I forgot now, but that was also a reasonable method, maybe the least robust of the 3 methods, but it came to yet another figure which was also quite high. So they all kind of agreed on the figure being somewhere between 3.4 million fatalities and 4.8, I believe. 3.4 million to 4.8. Now, if you recall what the coronavirus fatalities registered on Worldometer for India are something like 450,000 or so, yeah? So they basically said if you take the midpoint of those 3 studies, the factor is 10. 10 times as many fatalities, which is excess mortality here, which may include COVID fatalities and other fatalities that are indirectly linked to the government measures and so on. But so excess mortality, 10 times the registered number. Registered 450,000, and their midpoint was something like 4.5 million. And again, I think those three methodologies that they used, they were pretty reasonable to me. The third one I thought was maybe least robust in my view, but I'm not certain. And I mean, they just laid all three of them out, and I guess saying, look, you can pick the one you like best, but it's all roughly the same order of magnitude, right? It's somewhere between 8 and 12 times as much as registered COVID fatalities, right? It's in that range, right? And I think they have a pretty good reason to be confident about that. Now, my number in my model, I was trending it down a little bit, and it was just below 6.9 or so last month. I started at 7 point something, and then I explained before why I'm trending these multiples down a little bit. Every month I adjust them a little bit, which I still think is plausible. So I was at 6.9 factor. They say 10. So we're not awfully far away. I'm a bit more conservative. They're a bit more aggressive, but they have overall the better data for sure than I do. So I'm inclined to take them very seriously, but I thought, okay, maybe I disregard that high-end one of theirs and take the other two. And maybe, I take into account the data is already a few months old. So if I applied the data for, let's say, May, then I already would have trended it down a little bit. So I did a little bit of my usual, not very transparent adjustments in my head. And I said, okay, I take a factor 8. Which is the low end of their range. Yeah, I had 6.9 in my model. I bumped it up to 8 on the basis of what they found, which is the low end of their range. So it could be worse than 8, I admit that, but I'm okay, I take the factor 8. And that's still quite a significant bump up for India in my model, and that is the main reason why this month we have a pretty steep increase. But I mean, you've noticed, I've talked about it several times, that at the moment it fluctuates because I keep adjusting things at different angles. Last time it was Peru that made me adjust things, and remember I lifted the IFR from 0.19 to 0.2. Still is at 0.2, but I may still have to raise it a little bit more because countries like Mexico, Iran, Peru, South Africa, they're all bumping up onto that full penetration level of 100%. They're getting close, and it cannot be that they cannot get above the 100% by my definition. So they have to be somewhat below, right? So if they bump up to that, then I may be forced again to increase the IFR. So maybe in a month or two, maybe I have to go from 0.2 to 0.21, which then lowers the infection rate again. So you may expect a bit more waviness in the next few months, but I'm very confident about what I did with India. If anything, it's probably conservative, I think. But the other thing you have to keep in mind is that these studies by the Center for Global Development, they were looking at total excess mortality. Only a portion of that is COVID. In my model globally right now, that portion is just under 0.7. Yeah. So of all the excess fatalities, 0.67, or so to say number, so 2/3 is COVID fatalities, and 1/3 is all other excess mortality that I am assuming almost by definition is related to COVID. Right? And so either it's government policies that kill people, or it's unpreparedness. I mean, no oxygen available. There's a point, and I talked about this at length, and it's difficult. It's a judgment call. Up to which point do you call that a COVID? Because yes, people who have COVID have breathing problems, so and they may be asphyxiated, and that should count as a COVID case. But there's a point at which government has been so tremendously incompetent, where you say, no, you can't blame the COVID any longer on that. If I mean, we knew for 16 months that people need oxygen when it comes, right? And that oxygen is available, right? You just have to prepare for it. And if the Indian government, I mean, they had, let's say, 12 months time until like when it started in March or so, they had 12 months time to buy oxygen for everywhere, right? And it's not, I mean, it's not excusable if then people massively die because they don't have an oxygen bottle anywhere available, right? And they run out of oxygen. There's a point where that no longer counts as COVID fatality, but it counts as policy failure, right? So, but where you draw that line, yeah, I know it's difficult. But so I had to make a judgment call out of that factor of 8. What proportion is COVID and what proportion is other, right? And I think for India, I put the proportion that is COVID slightly lower than the global average. So I put it at 0.6 or 0.65, if I remember correctly. And for my global average, as I said, it's 0.67 or 0.68 or something like that. So it's a bit, yeah. So I mean, this figure could have been even a bit higher if I had assumed that a higher proportion of those excess fatalities, so it's 8 times 4, so it's just about 4 million total excess fatalities in India. If I had assumed that a higher proportion of those are COVID fatalities, but I put it slightly below global average. And I think I'm comfortable with that because there's a lot of evidence that in India, a lot of people died unnecessarily, or they died not because of COVID, but because of the measures that the government took. There's a lot of evidence. And, I have other countries like Mexico, Peru, where the same is the case, where, the proportion of fatalities that are not directly COVID related, but they're, related to all kinds of other mishaps, mismanagement, etc., is higher than the global average. Right? So there are several countries like that, and now India is one of them. That is to some degree a judgment call, and nobody can know this exactly. Right? It's not knowable. Yeah, so that's the main change, and that gets us to 66% penetration, and the factor of my estimated or calculated cases over the registered cases is still 21. I think still the same from last time, and I think I said before, it seems like we've roughly gotten to a level of 20x, and it seems that we are stabilizing around that level. And then the fatalities, let me move this a little bit. So remember there's sort of an artificial line here. If we assume IFR of 0.2%, then the expected COVID fatalities without vaccines would be 12.85 million. So that is the line here, the dotted line I've drawn. And the gray area above that is just simply once total fatalities hit that gray area, it means more people have died than if the governments collectively around the world had done nothing. Or I wouldn't say had done nothing. If they had just done, what Sweden did, or largely did, at least until January this year did, which is just put the responsibility on each individual to protect themselves. Because if governments had done that, then we would have the theoretical calculated value of fatalities, the COVID fatalities would be 12.85, given IFR 0.2. So that is sort of it's an artificial line, it's a calculated line, but it's a mental line, but there is a line here somewhere where government policy will have killed more people than it saved, and including vaccines. Right? Most people, insofar as there are lives prolonged significantly, it's largely thanks to the vaccines. Right? And they are having clearly an effect, but the negative sides of government policy will out-compete or out-size the savings thanks to the vaccine or any other government policies, and so far they had any savings. And I guess what I'm pointing, so the red box there just says, once you're in that gray space, then you're in a space where government-induced fatalities exceed government-induced savings of lives, if you want to call them that. Yeah. So in other words, you have more fatalities as if you had like monkeys for government. Yeah. You can call that then mass murder, if you like. I would not object to that. And the point here is, as you can see, the blue curve, remember, is the excess fatalities. We are getting very close. We are very close to hitting that curve, that line where excess fatalities outstrip any kind of savings from any kind of government policies, including vaccination programs. Now the numbers may be incorrect, of course. You know, if I have to adjust the IFR higher, then that estimated COVID fatality number will also go up a little bit, right? So that bar will then go up a bit, and then maybe be a bit further away from it. It may be, as I just explained, for countries like India, Mexico, Peru, some others, I'm making maybe fairly aggressive assumptions as to what proportion of the total excess mortalities are non-COVID, right? So that gap between the green curve, which is our COVID fatalities, and the blue curve, which is our excess mortality in the whole, that gap, that delta, of course, it may be that I'm overestimating that, right? Yeah, no, we're getting to a point where, you know, we may reach a point where we have to conclude, at least a preliminary conclusion, that government policies have killed more people than it saved. And of course, the average age of those people killed by governments will be significantly lower than those saved, and also their immune systems on average will be stronger. Whichever way you turn it, so the number of man years destroyed by the governments will far exceed the number of man years saved or extended by their policies. Far. Yeah. If we talk about individuals, we are soon reaching the break even. But if we are talking about man years, which is the more relevant variable, if you think about it, then the government policy impact will far, I mean, the negative impact on man years will far exceed the positive savings of man years. Okay. Oh, this may be a mistake. Here I say 70% of total excess mortality. As I said now, because of the India modifications, and I think I'm now at 68% or so. So maybe this figure is just copied over from last month. But other than that, I think the numbers are what they are. So the currently calculated COVID fatalities, now we are at about 8.5 million. And that 8.5, as I say, is probably about 68% or so of the total excess mortality of 12.7. And it's a factor of 2x over the reported fatalities. Slightly higher factor than last time. That's because of the India figures, I think, primarily. Yeah, so there you are. That's the statistics. Next thing I've been tracking is Germany, Sweden. Sorry, I think I went one. Did I go one? Did I pass Sweden? Yeah. Sweden, Germany, US, and I've added the UK, just mapping their reported COVID fatalities against the theoretical green curve that I constructed on the basis of Sweden, Sweden being the most normal country in my definition. So Sweden more or less traces their own curve, but you can see that in January they did some significant interventions. And that was because they knew the vaccines are coming. And in that moment, of course, it is harder to argue we shouldn't have these measures if we know that if you can extend those lives a little bit and then vaccinate those people, then we may well have really protected them well. Right? So it's very, in that moment, it becomes very effective to do measures, right? And so the Swedes did the measures really in the moment where it became really effective, whereas almost all other governments did measures when it wasn't really effective. So yeah, so that's their curve. US curve, Germany is a bit more bouncy because more hammer, more intervention, so more yo-yo effect. The interesting thing is that Germany, you can't see that very well here, but their numbers now are a bit above the green curve. So although now it's like deep summer and you would expect very, very small numbers like in Sweden, but they're actually a bit higher. You can't see that because the green curve is painted such a fat curve. But if it was a less fat curve, you would see that the German 7-day average is actually slightly above that curve, not by a lot, but meaning what I was arguing before, by hammering down and then loosening, you extend the seasonality, right? Because by lowering the seasonal activity for the virus as well as all other viruses, and then you loosen up again, which the Germans have to some degree loosened up again in most parts of the country, then you expect a yo-yo effect, and you expect now to have more viral activity because they're making up for lost time during the actual season, right? So it's another way of saying you're extending the seasonality a bit, right, by a few months, and that's what we are, I think, seeing in Germany. So that's as expected. In the US, it's a bit different because they never had those full lockdowns in all parts of the US. They had a mixed bag, and they were always, last summer also, they were always a bit more liberal, and there was always more activity than in for example, Germany or Sweden, or any of the European countries really. But partially that may be because of different climate zones in the US. It's a more diverse climatic range than maybe if you compare with EU countries. They did have an effective rollout of vaccines, and that lowered their curve below what you would have anticipated. And now they're a little bit above the curve again, as they were last summer. So that was expected because just there's a lot of activity now in the US. In many states, they're almost back to normal now. And so you would expect some more activity when the variant, like the Delta virus, for example, comes in, and you just do expect some more activity over the summer in the US. And even though they have a high degree of vaccinations and already a pretty high degree of national penetration, 50% or so, nevertheless, you would then expect some increase in the fatalities. And that's what we're seeing right now in the US. So that's at the moment all as expected. And then I put the UK, and I put the UK because, as I said many times, Mr. Johnson is this bouncy guy, right? Boom, 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 ping, pong, ping, pong, ping pong. He's saying ping pong. And, you can see that a little bit in the UK curve. So I just wanted to demonstrate that a bit, right? Initially, they had a very high number of cases because they had a laissez-faire. At the beginning, they were dismissive, right? And said, just another false alarm, right? It's influenza, which is true, right? It's actually less than influenza, actually. But at the time, it was this kind of laissez-faire. And I don't think they put enough attention, a bit like the Swedes, on their medical system, especially old folks' homes. The UK, a bit like in Sweden, they didn't take the situation in the old folks' home seriously enough, and they had a lot of fatalities there. So they had a very steep one. Then they hammered down really strongly. Then they had a very low-lying summer because everything was hammered down on. Then just when the season starts for the virus, they started loosening up a bit, which I said many times before. Many European countries got it completely wrong, their timing. Right? In summer, they hammered down. And when the autumn came, they couldn't hammer anymore because people were getting really frustrated with all these hammers. And they let go a bit. And just when the natural seasonal cycle kicks in. So the worst case scenario, right? They should have, if anything, they should have done it the counter-cyclical, but so they had a big increase, then they hammered again. This is different than the Germans. The Germans also had a big increase, but they let it go for a while. The UK, they very quickly hammered again. but then let go again, because running up to Christmas time, and we say, oh, we need to let people have the Christmas, and it shoots up. I mean, so this is really, you know, the yo-yo effect par excellence. I mean, there are some other European countries which have even stronger yo-yos, I think. But yeah, the UK is pretty classic, right? Then right after Christmas, they started hammering down again, very strong hammer. Then they also rolled out the vaccine, so there's a positive effect there. And so their curve after Christmas looks, you know, similar to that of some other European countries. But what you're now seeing, Freedom Day, right? You're seeing an increase again. And this will be interesting because in the UK, if you have such a strong yo-yo, such a strong, you know, flip-flopping and ping-ponging in your policy, you ought to really see, even though they have a high penetration with vaccinations and a high natural penetration, 60% or so of the UK already had a natural penetration with the virus before even the vaccines then come on top. So they have a very high penetration with vaccinations. Nevertheless, of course, there will always be some groups who are not protected. And so we would expect now to see a bit of a bump up of fatalities. Not a huge one, because it's just there are not enough people who are even susceptible now to potentially being fatally ill. But there are some. And so I'm just curious to see whether we'll get another little bounce in the UK. And then, of course, as I said before, all eyes will be on the next autumn, which is not that far off. 2 months from now, we're already in autumn. And we would see a natural increase in cases, right? And we are predicting that we will have a very modest increase in fatalities, because by then so many people have been vaccinated or naturally immunized that we would not expect a lot of fatalities, but we will expect some increase just because the number of cases will go through the roof. And there will be some people not protected among them, right? So therefore the fatalities will go up, but not by a huge amount. That's what we're expecting, right? So as I said before, I probably want to see a complete 2-year cycle, and then maybe the analysis is done, but you know, continue with this for a little while. Divergence, yeah. Countries are getting closer and closer to having the vast majority of people, especially the vulnerable people, either already naturally immunized or vaccinated, right? So more and more countries are reaching, and up to last month, I was measuring, you know, how close are they to a cumulative 80%. And remember, I explained at some point how I'm not just simply adding the natural infection rate and the vaccination rate on top of each other, because there's a lot of overlap, but I have some method of, finding out what's the cross-section between them and taking that out so that I'm not double counting. But I have a way, therefore, to get to a point where I say, how far away are they from 80%, meaning herd immunity, taking into account both natural and vaccinated effect, right? And this month, because a lot of countries are getting there, I raised the bar and I said, let's make it 90%. And the reason I'm doing that is because the evidence from some countries is even, I mentioned them earlier, South Africa, Iran, Peru, Mexico, I think those are the main ones. They reach 90%, at least if my model is correct and my IFR is correct, and still they're having quite a number of fatalities. Not as many as they used to have, and you know, you can clearly see the number of fatalities are capped and you know, not as high, but there's still a substantial number in some of them. Of course, South Africa is currently winter, right? So it can be explained. In Iran, probably the Delta variant going through now. So, you know, you can explain why there are an increase in fatalities, but it is, in some of those cases, more than I would have reckoned. So I've decided that because, of course, you have that effect of new variants, to some degree, they may drive up the IFR, right? Or, you know, or someone who already had an infection with the previous variant may nevertheless not be quite as well protected against the new variant as you might have hoped, or as I might have hoped, right? Which is what I said at the very beginning about maybe it takes not just a few cycles for full adaptation between the virus and us, but also quite a number of variants, that our immune system just needs to get exposed to quite a number of them to get a full picture and to be really well-rounded in its effectiveness against this virus family, if you like. So, so maybe I was a bit optimistic when I said, oh, after one encounter, you're good. I'm kind of still saying that, but with a bit of a caveat saying, maybe not quite so. I mean, but you're on the right track in terms of your immune system getting to know this virus, but maybe not quite there yet. Each new variant is a new learning experience for the immune system, right? So we may need a few of those to really be well-rounded. So so I've just, to take account for those deliberations, I've pushed what I define as herd immunity, which is just simply the point at which you really expect the fatalities to really trend down and stay down. I've bumped that up to 90%. So the time effective to herd immunity that you see on the right is now number of months to 90%. So Sweden is 1 more month. US, interestingly, 4. What happened in the US actually used to be very close to being one of the leaders, but their vaccination program has slowed down very much. And that's not necessarily negative, mind you. I mean, it probably means it's the freest country where people are least hounded by their governments to get vaccinated, meaning that, yeah, they have the greatest self-responsibility. That could mean that, right? And also, so that would be a good thing in my book, right? And also, what did I want to say? Oh, as I've been saying, actually, it's crazy to vaccinate everybody, right? So the US vaccination program slowing down, it's also a good thing in that respect. Hopefully, other countries will follow that example. In Europe, unfortunately, now they're like all out vaccinating everybody. So Europe is now overtaking the US, which had an early lead in vaccinations. But that's not necessarily a good thing, because most of these people don't, I mean, most of these vaccines go to people who don't need them, right? And as I said earlier, there may be repercussions of that. So in a way, the US is the more healthy regime, in my view, than the European regime, right? So funnily now, the Europeans are closer to reaching that herd immunity than the US. But because they've ramped up their vaccination programs, right? And the natural penetration levels are not that different, but in some European countries, they're higher than in the US. So UK, Italy, the sort of the early ones that had early significant infections. But the vaccination programs have caught up with the US and maybe overtaken in some cases. So they are now closer to having 90% herd immunity than the US. But actually, the US is, in a way, the healthier regime in my book, just to be very clear. Doesn't mean that the shortest time span here is necessarily the best, because it may have different reasons. In places like Mexico, South Africa, and Iran, and Peru, it basically, unfortunately, just means they had so many fatalities so quickly, right? So that's not necessarily a good thing. And they are already at herd immunity before they have a chance to really make the vaccines effective. So for them, the vaccines are largely coming too late. Not fully too late, because there will still be some people benefiting from it, but the proportion of people who benefit from the vaccine in these countries will be very small, because most of those who are at risk already were exposed to the virus anyway, so it's too late. So being at herd immunity in that sense is not necessarily a good thing. Okay, it can be a good thing insofar as that country could just say, okay, we just go back to normal, we're done. They could say that, but none of them is doing that. So maybe they're not aware of my numbers, okay, or don't believe them, but yeah. So they could just, I mean, the benefit of this chart could be to these countries to say, okay, we're done. No more measures, right? But the negative side of it is that, yeah, you're done because you allowed so many people to die, and the vaccines are basically too late for you, which is a shame, right? So whether how you interpret these months to herd immunity, that's a bit tricky. In places like Egypt and Philippines, they're years away, or years away from getting done. That's certainly not positive, right? In other new normal countries, they're starting to shorten the cycle. Japan, Korea, Thailand, they've all ramped up their vaccination programs in the last month or two, and they're now really starting to finally sort of catch up. So these numbers are coming down, which is probably a good thing. Egypt is kind of unclear because the vaccination is very slow, but they are also not having a lot of fatalities now. But I wonder about those figures, because I have this feeling that Egypt is now a country that no longer really tracks the true fatalities. I think they did for a while, and maybe then the autocrat, the general stepped in and said, I don't want to see those numbers, so they don't show them anymore. So Egypt is now sort of, I'm not sure whether I have enough data, because in my model, I'm not sure what multiplier now to. I have a pretty high multiplier for Egypt, but now at the moment I'm a bit uncertain about Egypt, what to say. But yeah, that's the picture. And we have the usual, so we are now 66% penetration getting to 100, we're still 1% people get severely ill with COVID-19, 0.2% of all infected die, that's our IFR, no change. 99% of humanity affected, massive impact on the economies. Now some economies are recovering quite well. So, Mania disrupted, yeah, and then economies, and what the IMF estimated there last year, that may at some point have to be revised. I have the feeling that the economies, broadly speaking, are recovering better than expected in many parts of the world. So maybe the long-term damage will not be as high as 22 trillion, but we'll see. And the state of exception, as I said, I mean, politicians now finding all kinds of reasons to extend it. Vaccines, oh, you are not vaccinated? Then, oh, we cannot exit our state of exception as long as some people refuse to be vaccinated. They're now being pointed finger at, you are refusing to be vaccinated, you're an asocial criminal because you're holding up everybody else, which is of course completely the wrong way around, right? Completely the wrong way around. But that's what a lot of people now are saying. It's scary. It's just like during the Nazi period, people who helped the Jews when they were persecuted, their neighbors pointed at them and said, these people are helping Jews, they are criminals. No, they were the only ones who weren't criminals. But they were treated like criminals. Yeah. It's the same thing here. The only ones who are behaving rationally and who are saying, I have my rights, and that's the first thing, you have to give me my rights, then I can take responsibility for my health. They're the ones now being singled out by the unthinking masses that Goethe talked about and being hammered on. It's exactly the same thing as with those Germans or Dutch or other Polish who helped the Jews, try to help them find a hiding place and maybe get out in time before they were caught, right? There were those people, remember Schindler's List and Anne Frank, who was hid in some little space by, I think, a Dutch family or something like that, right? Those people who did the right thing, if they were caught by the authorities, they would be dead, right? Because they were doing the right thing, they were hounded. And we have the same thing again. The people who are doing the right thing are being hounded by the unthinking majority. That's very, very scary. Okay, last time I promised I would start looking at birth rates, because one of the impacts of government policies not of COVID, but of government policies, is on birth rates, right? And those people who like to talk about human lives or lifetime protected and extended, they, to be strict, they would have to take into account net effects on birth rates as well. I don't think I will go all that far to calculate all of this, but I do want to see, well, what is the effect on birth rates, right? Now, generally speaking, in high-income countries, and I don't know exactly how they are defined, but there's a definition for that somewhere. And I have data points here on the city of Genoa, on Italy, on the US, on Korea, Germany and France. Generally speaking, the trend is birth rates are down. Since about the end of last year, I mean, remember it takes 9 months to generate a birth. With the measure setting in March, the first impact is visible in December. Right? So since late last year, people are starting to look at this, and they're seeing some measurable impact on birth rates go down. What they don't know yet, and it's too early to tell, is that just a temporary dip, and when we are finally back to normal, birth rates will just go back to the previous trend line. And in some previous crises where birth rates dropped, like in wars, for example, we even had a yo-yo effect. So during the war, the birth rates go down, but then after the war, they shoot up and they exceed the trend line and make up for the losses of the wartime. And net, the impact on the birth rates is modest. Yeah. So the post-war boom compensates for the wartime dip. That could happen here as well, right? So clearly there is a trend down now that is quite visible, and quite a lot of data coming in, and I will continue to look at this every now and then. And by the end of this year, or maybe early next year, we'll probably have a boost of data coming in for the year 2021, and we'll see. But at the moment, we know that the birth rates in the high-income countries are going down, and down below trend, meaning that must have very likely has something to do with COVID policies. It's quite measurable and visible, and it's not just a statistical aberration, I think. So it's quite clear that birth rates in the high-income countries are going down in conjunction with the COVID policies. However, what we don't know is, do they come back up and overcompensate, or compensate? In which case, you might just say, yeah, okay, but there was, even if the number in the end is nets out, there was a delay. So you lost some baby years, many years, because you delayed those births, right? But I mean, we're not going to be too arithmetic centric on this, right? But I think we do want to see, we want to have a holistic picture of the impact of these government policies, right? And this is one area. Now, in the low and mid-income countries, this is less clear. There are some countries like the Philippines and Indonesia that reported I didn't put that name, but the second line for the low-income country, mid-income countries, the second line is in Indonesia. They're in the early stage of COVID-19. They reported increases in birth rates, right? Number of unplanned babies born, or drop in the use of contraceptives. I mean, in Indonesia, I know there were, during the lockdowns, people just couldn't get the contraceptives that they normally buy, because normally they would pop by some, shop or some, pharmacy or wherever they got the stuff. And during the lockdown, they couldn't get there. And they failed to buy the normal contraceptives, and they either got out of rhythm, or whatever it is that they use. It meant that they had a higher propensity to do unprotected sex, even if they had no plans to have children. Right? And that's unprotected sex. The incidence of that went up temporarily, at least for a while. Now, that may well be temporary, right? Because so you get a baby boom for a while, but then the effect sort of annuls itself because people find different ways of getting there. You can maybe get your contraceptives online, right? And after a while, you figure that out and you're back to normal, right? You're back to your normal trend line, right? But at least temporarily, there were reports of significantly increased birth rates. There's also some reports on, I mean, you know, still the rise in stillbirth. Even in the high-income countries, there's some rise in stillbirth. So there's a linkage between, you know, maybe the hospitals being overloaded, or people are afraid to go to the hospital, give birth, you know, at home, or which is riskier. Or, I mean, there can be a whole, I haven't thought about this yet, but there can be a whole range of things that might cause increase in stillbirth, right? Malnutrition linked to government policies, whatever, right? But yeah, there's empirical evidence in high income and low and medium income countries that the stillbirths are rising. So that's another factor. So for the low and medium income countries, it's not clear whether at the moment, whether we've experienced a baby boom or whether there's also a bust in some countries, and whether, you know, how it cancels each other out or not. So the picture is less clear. In high-income countries, very clear right now. Birth rates are down. What's not yet clear is whether they are permanently down, so that we have a real permanent ditch in drop in births, or whether it's a temporary phenomenon and it will be compensated once we're back to normal. Right? That we don't know yet. So that's on this topic. So COVID response and lives. Remember, I'm tracking number of people killed by the immune system, 8.5 million. That's our so-called COVID fatalities. Expected to be killed by the immune system, 12.85. That's my theoretical value based on an IFR of 0.2%. So what you can see is the delta is 4.35 million. So we are currently at 66% of the expected fatality. And as I said, thanks to the vaccines, we should stay below that number. We should not get to 100% because the vaccines are saving some lives. Then I'm tracking the number of people, the excess mortality minus the COVID mortality, and that's what I call people killed by government policy, because that's essentially what it boils down to, in my view. That's 4.23 million, right? And remember, I said if that number becomes bigger than this delta, then governments have killed more people than they saved. And as I already pointed out on the previous chart, we are now very close. We have 97% of that happening. Yeah. Once we're above 100% means, this delta becomes negative, meaning more people have died of government policy than were saved by government policy. And again, these are people. If I translated this into men years, and I don't have good data to really do that, but it's very clear that in terms of man years, the gap is even bigger, because the people who died due to policy on average are clearly younger and fitter than the ones who are saved from the COVID predicament, who by definition are people who are old and have poor immune systems, right? So their life expectancy by definition, as I said before, is lower than. Whereas a lot of the people who are being killed by government policy may actually be mid-aged or even children among them. So average lifespan of these people would have been significantly higher than of those people. Okay, and then I've added a category here, excess decline in births, assuming that there's a net decline. As I said, we don't know that yet, but that's TBD, and I'm not sure. This may take many months, even years, to really get a good handle on this number. So this may remain TBD for a long time. But if I get some good quality data that points into a certain direction, I will share that. It's something I'm interested to track, but it's not easily trackable at the moment. It's too early. Yeah, vaccination progression. Remember, I said 1% of the world population actually benefit from the vaccine, which is the ones who fall ill. In fact, truly speaking, it's only 0.4%, because of this 1%, 0.6% probably already were naturally immunized. Maybe a bit less, because elderly people, I talked about this before, may have a lower propensity to be naturally immunized because they are less active. So, you know, but this number, 1%, is an overestimation. It's actually even less than that, right? But anyways, in just you take the 1%, that's 79 million people, almost 80 million people now, 1% of global population. Those actually benefit from the vaccine. Now, we don't know exactly who they are, so we have to have a heuristic how to figure out who are the people who have a certain amount of risk that they're in that group. And we calculated that, and we came to 13%, and by some factor 65% and older, you know, and then some factors for obesity and diabetes and maybe some other things. So I calculate that to be 13%. So 13% of the global population should get the vaccine because they have some measurable, and they're identifiable, right? We know their age, we can know their diabetes status, we can know their obesity status. So they're identifiable people. So one could actually have targeted them and given the vaccine to them. That would have been around about 1 billion people worldwide, including China, right? And then we would have been done because we would have known, okay, with slight error margin, of course, but you know, basically we vaccinated all those people that have any measurable risk of becoming ill with COVID. There would have been about 1 billion people, and we could have pinpointed them. We could have, you know, most countries, at least they have an age record of people. They may not have a record whether they are, you know, whether they are overweight and obese or diabetic. Many countries may not have that, or it may not be accessible to them. But one could have said, okay, all people with 65 and older we target, and then we have campaigns for those other target groups. We just make campaigns, and knowing that not all people will show up, right? We don't force it on them. This is all voluntary, right? But we campaign clearly. We are looking for you. You are in that group. Please come. And if you do that very consistently, you would probably get a pretty high, you know, show-up rate. Not a full show-up rate, but a pretty high rate. Right? Unfortunately, countries didn't do that. Instead, they said, oh, everybody has to be vaccinated, and we have to be at war with the virus, and we have to slow down the virus, da, da, da. So they were using the vaccines to get to herd immunity rather than using them to protect those people who needed protection, right? And so those countries, and there are lots of those countries, they diluted the message. Instead of telling the old people, you must be vaccinated, you're the ones we're targeting, they said the opposite. No, everybody, and you know, oh, and if you can surround the elderly with people who have been vaccinated, then the elderly will be very well protected. But that's exactly the wrong way around, right? So in the end, in some countries, exactly those people got vaccinated who didn't need it. Right? It's quite sad, right? It's not only a waste of these vaccines, but it's also the wrong message. And now you have countries in which it's especially elderly who didn't get vaccinated, right? So you've got it exactly the wrong way around. Right? And those countries are basically now in trouble because, you know, yeah, they are 18 months into this crisis and still haven't vaccinated those people who actually need it. Right? And they have wasted a lot of vaccine, giving it to people who don't need it. Right? So yeah, so it's quite a sad story. But if we had targeted the right people, as I said before, we would have been done by 1st of July, worldwide. And we could have gone back to normal. And in my scenarios, we could have gone back to early spring. Because then everybody could just open their borders to each other. Right? But governments, by and large, with very few exceptions, didn't do that. They did some kind of mixed strategy or diluted strategy and very poor communication as to who really needs the vaccine and what the vaccine really does. Most people to this day, I guarantee you, do not understand what the vaccine does. Most people probably think, oh, we're taking the vaccine to not get infected. No, you're taking the vaccine to not get seriously ill. But most people don't understand that. And they don't understand it because the governments didn't tell them the right story. They told them the wrong narrative. So they tell them fairy tales, and then the people believe those fairy tales, right? If you tell people long enough that there's a bad wolf in the forest, and don't go in the forest with a Red Riding Hood on because it could be dangerous, and people will start believing that. Yeah, they actually really do. So what instead we did, we are just randomly almost, vaccinating everybody who has 2 legs. Not particularly focusing those who actually really should get it, at least not consistently enough so that those people are really clear, oh, it's me, right? I'm called upon to get this vaccination. So we've got far more vaccines out than we would have needed. Nearly 30% of global population by now. This is excluding China. This is 30% of the world ex-China, because I have no idea what China does. They may be talking about the vaccination program, but I don't believe them a word, right? So, because they are so big, I don't include them. And we've had 1.88 billion people get at least one jab, which I've always been saying is already sufficient, gives you very high protection against COVID. So far more than actually needed it. And yet we are far away from really having completed the program, because many of those who actually should have been vaccinated weren't vaccinated. Instead, many other people were vaccinated who didn't need it, right? So unfortunately, the overlap between those who need it and those who get it is partial. And it's not even, in some countries, not even particularly strong. I mean, Indonesia at some point said, oh, we're going to vaccinate, we have a different strategy. We vaccinate the young people first. Why? Oh, because they're more mobile. So this was clearly, the whole thinking was you need to slow down the virus, right? Oh, so they are more mobile. The old people, they don't really participate in active life anyway, so they are not so at risk. That's true in a sense that they are less the propensity of them to get infected is lower, but once they get infected, the propensity to die of it is much higher. So yeah, but the Indonesian government targeted completely the wrong group. They may have changed that since then, I don't know, but there are clearly governments who are completely wasting their vaccines. Yeah. So despite the fact that we have already vaccinated far more people than needed to be vaccinated, we're still far away from having really hit those who are at risk, which is quite sad. Yeah, this, but predictable, but yeah, disaster. And then if you consider the vaccination mania that I was describing, we may end up with hundreds of percent, if not thousands of percent of people vaccinated, meaning the same person has to be vaccinated again and again and again and again, right? Every 9 months, because the antibodies in the blood disappear, or each time when any government decides there's a new variant and we need a new booster. And of course, all the governments will then have their own policy again, and we will never exit the fractured world at all, right? Oh, but you are not on the same schedule as us. Oh, we've already gotten booster vaccination against the epsilon virus, and you haven't, so we cannot travel there. I mean, you can extend this thing forever if you want, right? And then, maybe people will then say, oh, if you want to travel to our country, we don't accept your vaccine. We have the Chinese version or the Russian version or the local version or whatever version, right? You need to get our vaccine, otherwise we don't let you in. So we may end up having all of us 3 to 5 different vaccines from different manufacturers. We may get vaccinated every 6 to 9 months. If in the extreme, if the government says every 6 to 9 months the antibody count on average is so low that you're no longer protected, so we are at war with the virus forever. We want this to be a forever war. And keep the virus down forever. So therefore, we have to vaccinate you again and again and again. And if you don't vaccinate, you'll get locked out. Yeah. And then once they have these vaccination passports rolled out and they have a mechanism with high tech where everything can be tracked and every restaurant tracks whether you have been vaccinated, why stop at this vaccination? I mean, why stop at one cold virus? Maybe you can do the same for the other 2 cold viruses, or maybe more importantly, how about influenza? Why don't we put influenza on our vaccination pass? Oh, you don't have the latest influenza booster? Oh, we don't let you in, right? I mean, all of this can yet happen. I'm not saying it definitely happens, but it could happen, right? I mean, the more we carry on with the madness, the more likely these scenarios will happen, right? And then we are forever in the fractured world. Maybe that's what people want. I don't know. Okay, so last time, remember, I proposed a new set of long-term scenarios. So I'm using the same pictures, but mind you, the axes are different, the definitions are different. On the horizontal, trust in our immune system, either it's completely lost or it recovers. And on the vertical, trust in our mental faculties, either they are completely lost or they recover. As with any good scenario, you always start your tracking in the middle. That's your starting point, 1st of July. And lo and behold, 1st of August, this is where I think we are heading. Southwest, into the age of robots. We have taken first steps towards turning ourselves into robots. Why am I saying that? I'm saying, one, we are increasingly losing, or at least not regaining, our trust in our immune system. And the longer that carries on, the more it will be basically completely lost. And my early indicators at the moment for that are no mentioning of the immune system at all. In the entire public debate, there's virtually no mentioning of immune systems, even though that's the key. As I said, that's the ultimate source and the root cause of COVID is our immune systems. But there's no mentioning of it at all in the public debate. And secondly, the vaccination mania that I described, it shows that, you know, implicit, even if it's not explicit, implicitly means you don't trust your immune system, you have to be vaccinated, right? Even if I were to tell you that 99% of people have a well-functioning immune system and they will not get sick, politicians say, I don't care. Vaccine, 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 vaccine. So implicitly, without maybe realizing it, they're putting zero trust into human immune systems. That's one reason why this vaccination mania is so dangerous. It gets us completely away from nature. I mean, the logical extension of this is to say we need to be vaccinated against everything. Any pathogen, either we eradicate it, we go to war, or we need to vaccinate. That's the sort of the logic into the direction. Now that's extreme, I know, and that doesn't happen overnight, but that's the trend I'm seeing. Right? With this first vaccination mania, more vaccination manias may follow if we don't watch out. So that's why I'm arguing we're moving to the left. And the reason I'm saying we're moving south, meaning there's less and less evidence that we trust our own mental faculties. One is there's no debate about what went wrong. I mean, normally, if you have a disaster, I mean, there's some flooding in Europe and there are endless debates about what went wrong. Here we have a global catastrophe, a stupidity catastrophe that like never before in the history of mankind. And there's nobody asks any question. There's no debate about what went wrong. There's an assumption here, implicit, not explicit, but implicit assumption that this crisis is not man-made. Oh, we are just reacting to a natural phenomenon, virus. No, not at all. The crisis is entirely man-made. The virus doesn't do anything other than perpetuating itself, which is nature. That's what nature does. Nature perpetuates itself. Yeah. That's all the virus does. It is all about man-made crisis. But there's no discussion of that at all. Right? And there's no attempt to understand what's actually the case. I mean, there's no debate that goes down to the level of what is actually happening. And therefore, there will be zero learning. If we don't start talking about this intelligently, there will be zero learning from this debacle, right? Yes, we will have learned, maybe zero is a slight exaggeration, we will have learned that, oh, we can produce vaccines in a matter of 15 months if we really get our heads together and do that. Now, there's, of course, in brackets, one should add, yeah, but for a very simple virus and a very simple problem, which is preventing the virus from getting somewhere where it doesn't want to go anyways. Right? That's a much easier vaccine than, I said this before, than, for example, HIV, right? Which is a much trickier virus. So yeah, for a very simple virus and a very simple brief, we can produce vaccines in 15 months' time. However, we are not able to then roll them out effectively. Yeah, that's the learning from the last 18 months, right? Yeah, so that you may say it's not zero learning, there's a little bit of learning, but there's very little learning because we're not debating the thing and we're not trying to understand actually what is the case? What is this virus about? What is this COVID thing about? What is our policy reaction about? What is this vaccination going to do? There is nothing of that. That's why I'm saying we're maybe you might say, we're standing still, we're not moving anywhere, we're just, yeah. But I mean, the more time progresses, you would expect that there would be some of that, right? I mean, it's the progression of time. You know, someone would start a debate, right? Or someone would ask some questions, but it just isn't happening. And I've been watching this for 17 months and it is not happening, right? So I'm inclined to say, no, this is a step back. We're not just standing still. We are regressing as humanity. With every month that goes by and we're not addressing the true issue and the real questions, we are regressing. That is at least my take. So I may not do this every month because this is a long-term scenario. This is maybe years and tens of years rather than months. But as an opening shot, I offer to you, we are moving southwest. We are getting closer to behaving like and treating each other like robots. And I end with a quote, and this is Nietzsche. This is not my translation, so it's much nicer English than my Goethe translation, I'm sure. Whoever fights with monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster in the process. If you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss gazes back at you. And I think that's exactly where we're heading. We're becoming monsters. And we've looked so deeply into this abyss that the abyss starts drawing us in. With that, Doraemon continues to do headstand. We're far away from putting Doraemon back onto his feet. I think he's having quite a headache already, but that's the state we are in. With that, have a great month and see you in a month's time. Bye-bye.